Hello, welcome to the live stream for November 15th, 2017. My name is Dana Morningstar, and let me make sure I got everything done correctly here. We'll find out in a second. Okay, we're good. Roberta is here. Shauna is here. Hello, hello. It feels like I have not been here in so long because I was on vacation last week, and it's amazing. It's only been a week. I have no concept of time. It's awful. It feels like it's been a month. Tom, Leslie, Tanitria, Dora, hello. Missed you guys too, Dora, Leslie, Angelique, Daniela, Shauna, Malta, all that Kaz. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Roxana from Florida, hello. SP Junkies, welcome. So a couple things I wanted to touch on. Let's see, before we get going. Okay, first off, thank you guys so much for those of you that have read my book and have left reviews for it. I saw the reviews. So thank you for that. That really, it helps with the Amazon algorithm to bump my book up so other people can actually find it, and it gives me great feedback as well, as far as like what you liked and what you didn't like and all of that. So thank you guys so much for that. And then just kind of wanted to let you know too, so here's what my writers group said. They had said for people, don't respond to reviews in Amazon. So that's why I'm not responding to them. They said that it's weird and kind of stalkerish. So, and it's interesting because every platform online is so different. Like, I'm on YouTube and I have a podcast and I have a Facebook group and I have my website and I have, Instagram and all these other things. And it's weird. There's always just different kind of unspoken rules as far as what to do or not do. And so they were saying, you can respond to people all you want on these other different websites like YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and whatever, but don't do it on Amazon, because people want to be able to leave a review and not feel like the author is kind of hovering over them, or that they have to be careful what they say. So I thought that was pretty insightful. I could see the difference. I guess what it is there's a difference between like leaving a review and leaving a comment. Like you leave a review on Amazon or on the podcast, but like you leave comments on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. Interesting difference there. So Roberta says, it's a good vacation when you lose time. Well, yeah, I have always had a weird relationship with time and space. It's very, very strange. I'm like a dog, or a goldfish. One day could be 5 days, 5 days could be one day. I mean, I'm always walking around in kind of a big fog of disorientation. I've always been like that. And I'm terrible with directions and when events happened. I'm always so envious of people that are like, yeah, that happened in the summer of 1985. Like, what? How do you know that? Like, I don't even remember like major things that most people remember as far as like years that they happened. I really have to make a very concerted effort to remember like the years, like just the years that certain things happened, and it's weird. So, and Anju is here. Welcome. Let's see. When I was on vacation, one of the things that we did that I don't normally do is we watched this show. The people that I went with are all really big into like cooking and kind of trying different things cooking wise. And so we were watching this show called, was it Britain's Best Baking Show? And that's become like my new obsession. So I have watched, I think we're on season 4 now of that show. watched hours and hours and hours of the show. It's totally lit a fire under me. I'm like, man, I really want to start baking. That it's fun to see what they do. And I don't know. It's a good show. It was a good show. Let's see. And what else did I want to touch on? Okay, book club. If for those of you that were not here last week, let me make sure I get this covered. Book club is going to be on November 30th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to run for, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours. And we did a last minute change of the book. So the new book that we're reading is called Boundaries After a Pathological Relationship by Adeline Birch. And it's a fairly short read. I got through it in about 2 days. I really liked the book. She writes in a very approachable way. She also runs a website, and she mentions it in her book where it's the same kind of thing as like what I do here. Like she works with people, provides a place for people to discuss different types of pathological relationships, and I'll cover it a lot more in book club, but there's quite a few different exercises she has in the book about getting in tune with your boundaries and kind of when a boundary has been violated, how to know you're on track with setting a boundary, kind of some signs of some weak boundaries that need work. I really liked how she just laid it all out. And I really liked this was probably the only book that we've read so far in book club that really talked about not getting caught up in continuing to reassert boundaries or even trying to make boundaries with a person, like with an emotional manipulator of any kind. Like her whole approach is basically you really just need to disengage, and this book is best used for knowing when these kinds of relationships need to end, and then for down the road how to apply these different techniques in the book. So I really liked that. Gamer Christina says, I wish I could tell people no without feeling guilty. Something as simple as, no, I don't feel like going out tonight. Why do I always have to people please before myself? Well, it takes practice. It takes practice saying no. And I think a lot of the times we tend to over empathize with people because we just because saying we it's like we kind of feel their hurt or that they're going to be let down. Like we just don't like hurting other people. But yes, where that kind of gets out of balance is, but the reality is then we're hurting ourselves. So somebody still is being hurt when we have a hard time saying no, because if we're saying yes to them and if it's saying no to ourselves, then there's a problem there. But there's certain ways that you can say no that are more comfortable. Like you could say something like, boy, I would really love to, but I can't. That's kind of a softer way of saying no. um, I have plans that night, or you can, kind of however it feels comfortable. I tend to like to kind of soften things if I can't do something, but you do get more comfortable over time with. So like here's an example of kind of a little mini way I said no in our friends retreat. Was one of my friends really wanted to do some mud masks, but I was super intent on finishing this show. And I was all for doing them, but I was like, man, can we just wait until like the season finale, which was like one more episode? And I'm like, then I'm all about doing mud masks. And she's like, yeah, that's totally fine. So it turned out to, and then we all ended up falling asleep. But she was fine with it. I was fine with it. It was just, but the old me would have been like, okay, yeah, she wants to do mud masks right now. Like, I'll stop the show and we'll go do it. And would have been a little bit irritated by that. And who knows, she might have been a little bit irritated at me because I didn't want to go do mud masks at the exact moment she did. But, and but it was such a it was such a non-issue. It was such an easy thing to just be like, to negotiate. Be like, I would totally love to do a mud mask. Can we wait until after the, the season ends? Or even after like that last episode ended, then we could take a break, do a mud mask, and then watch the season finale. So it takes practice. It does get easier with time. And, it's learning a new skill. Roberta says, "Oh, I have learned how to say no now, almost to the point I feel cruel." Yeah. A lot of times people, once they discover, they reclaim their power and they're like, man, okay, this feels really good to say no. Then what happens is a person goes from saying yes all the time and not even realizing that they're saying yes or that they're a people pleaser or a doormat. They're like, I just thought I was really go with the flow. So they go from this extreme of always saying yes. And then oftentimes they'll swing the exact opposite end of the spectrum. And then they'll start saying no all of the time. And it's almost to the point where they are very kind of gruff about it. And they're, because they've said yes for so long and they've been resentful and walked on for so long, that they really are very kind of harsh about drawing that line. And then it takes a little time to kind of get to that place where if a person's not trying to cross a boundary, like my friend with the mud masks, right? Like she had this idea, she wanted to do it. It wasn't a boundary issue. It was just like she really wanted to do it right then. I didn't. I would have been totally fine if she wanted to go do her mud mask and I would have done mine later, whatever. But to try to kind of find that middle ground, but there's a difference if a person's like continuing to, if they're pushing your boundaries or if they're acting in ways that are outrageous, then at that point, like you don't need to soften that. Like that can just be, and then that can be even be like an immediate no contact thing. This stuff all takes practice. Speaking of boundaries, there's a point that I wanted to touch on, which this was in something that was brought up in the support group the other day that I really thought it was a great kind of comment that somebody had asked or had mentioned. Ah, excuse me, I thought I was going to sneeze. Yes, no, no. Okay, good. And we were talking, I don't know, we were talking about boundaries, and somebody in there had posted some kind of things that this new person that she was dating was doing that were concerning to her. And um, so I'll just give some examples, but I won't give specific examples of her story. But it was like kind of things that were controlling, um, things that were condescending, things that were very harsh and kind of obsessive. Like, he had texted her and called her, multiple times in a row. She didn't answer because she was busy. And then he got very upset with her about that. And so she was posting about it. She's like, I don't know if I'm being hypersensitive to this. And my response was, any one of those things would not fly with me. And I wouldn't feel the need to, you know, to me, that's not my boundary that I would set would be to leave, because I don't want somebody that's obsessive like that. I don't want somebody that's controlling or condescending or, any of that. To me, that's not workable. And so anyway, so this other gal had made a very interesting comment. She'd said, well, but everybody's different. And, other people don't know where your boundaries are unless you let them know. And I completely agree with that. However, it's okay to have certain things be deal breakers. And I'm not saying that my way is the right way or the only way, but it's important that everybody gets in tune with like, what are your deal breakers and where are your boundaries at with that? And to realize that you don't have to set boundaries with stuff like that. Like you don't need to go back to them and say, this was not okay with me. I really don't want you. I'm not comfortable with being called, 8 times in a row. And I'm not comfortable with being talked down to like that, or, threats being made or being called names. Like you don't have to try to work on that. For me, that's not workable behavior. Like period. I'm out the door, because because odds are if it happens once, it's going to happen again. And I'd rather, the longer you stay in something, the harder it is to leave. And so if somebody shows, in my opinion, if somebody shows you their true colors like that, then it doesn't matter. Like it just, to me, it doesn't matter. I'm out the door. But anyways, so she had made the point. to my comment about being out the door of, but if you don't set boundaries with people, then you're always running. And I thought to myself, well, that's so interesting because I see it the exact opposite. I don't see it as me running away or somehow avoiding intimacy. I see it as me holding my ground. And so there's a very big difference. But I think that's one of the very common things that people tend to think when they first start being aware of what their boundaries and deal breakers are, is especially if a person is feels incomplete without somebody else. And so then there's this fear of like, but what if I lose out on a really great person? Or what if there's nobody better? Or what if, what if they can change, this kind of stuff? And they're trying to make this like largely problematic situation work. And so, but it's very common for a person to think like, maybe I'm just running away because I'm scared of being hurt, or maybe I'm running away because this person was a lot like my ex, and maybe I'm not really seeing the situation clearly, and they can really get lost in all of that confusion. But the reality is, well, it really helps to get in tune with this stuff before you start dating again. But to pay attention to how you feel, so when when things start to become like that, controlling, condescending, critical, confusing, crazy making, that you're okay with walking away. Like, you don't need to wait until things get so awful that you can barely hang on anymore. You've been down this path before, like, how this tends to go. Like, you don't need to wait for that concrete proof that yes, indeed they are abusive. These are the little early warning signs that you're dealing with a person that's got some problems and some problematic behaviors. And it's okay to not like anything that you don't want to like in your life. It's okay to simply not date a person because they smoke or they drink more than you like, or they have children and you've got grown children and you're like, you know what, this person's really great, I don't want to raise young children anymore. Or that they don't want to move, they live in the Midwest and you're like, man, I really want to move to California. I don't want to live here the rest of my life, right? So, and those are examples of some things that are just differences within people. It doesn't make the other person bad or wrong. It just, everybody's got differences and everybody kind of has what they're looking for. And so it's okay to have, and it's important to have a really clear idea of what you will and will not tolerate in a relationship, because it's really difficult to figure that stuff out when you're in the thick of it. And you've heard me talk about it before, I'm sure, where you know, uh, I used to say, my deal breakers were, abuse, addiction, adultery, or a really rotten attitude. And anymore, I've really tightened those boundaries up to where I don't do a relationship that's like perpetually confusing, crazy making, critical, condescending, controlling, any of that stuff. Like, if I'm continually finding myself introspective, like, is it me? Is it them? What's really going on? Is this a problem? Is this not a problem? If I'm coming from a place of I'm staying because I'm afraid to like I'm afraid of being alone, or I'm afraid to reject them, or because for fear, obligation, or guilt, then that's a sign I need to take a step back and really evaluate the situation, because that's not coming from a healthy place of, really truly like wanting a person in my life. It's coming from a place of kind of this unhealthiness of, fear of abandonment, or fear of rejection, or that people pleasing, or that just kind of unhealthiness. And so if you want a healthy relationship, it's got to come from, a healthy place within us, and it's got to be composed of healthy elements. So just a little thing there. Yes, that was the difference. Okay, let me scroll up. Daniel says, well, maybe the guy had attachment issues as well. And he might very well have. I think you could make the argument that a lot of narcissists and sociopaths do have attachment issues. I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, but it really doesn't matter, you know, male, and it's not even a guy thing. That's a male or female thing. So, and that kind of goes back to, it really helps if we can bring like our highest and best self into a relationship and not either not need to be fixed or not trying to fix other people, because it doesn't work. And, if another person is so, if they're so afraid of abandonment and they're so needy and they need to be healed, and, they're, and this is so common in, uh, people, rebound relationships or any other kind of thing like that, where people are like, I'm broken, I need to be healed, and they're looking towards another person to do all that work for them. And then that really doesn't work. Um, Hold on a second. Let me shut the door real quick. Okay, sorry about that. My boyfriend is downstairs watching these old World War II movies. They're awful. These campy, maybe even World War I, like they're real campy dramas, because he's a big Dungeons and Dragons player and they're doing some sort of role-playing game this weekend. And I don't know. Anyways, loud movies going on downstairs. Okay, Bonnie says, how to come into the reality that your husband of 30 years is a toxic narcissist and you are going to have to leave the relationship eventually. I think that realization happens a step at a time, and it's difficult, Bonnie, like you were saying, you've been married for 30 years, you have 3 grown children. How do you navigate that? And there's going to be challenges with staying, and then there's going to be challenges with leaving. And I think to realize that. And I would encourage you to get a support system around you. And while you're in that relationship, to make it as kind of palatable and do as much damage control as you possibly can. I think a lot of people tend to stay really busy is one way to do it. And depending on kind of where on the spectrum he is, if you know if setting some boundaries, if he would actually listen to you and somewhat respect you, if you were to say something like, to start practicing saying no. And um, coda groups are fantastic ways to practice this kind of stuff and to discuss it. coda.org, I believe, is their website. They have free meetings all over the world. They have free meetings online as well. And um, to kind of just begin to explore what that's going to look like. But I think, that's the challenge too, with like staying is hard, but then leaving is its own level of difficulty. And it can really help if you can prepare yourself for that as much as possible if you do in fact decide to leave. Meetup.com is another, I think, huge, wonderful resource that's out there. It's free. There's tons of groups all over the world. It can be a great way to get out there and to start developing, friendships and hobbies and all of that. Because no matter how rotten a relationship is, or no matter how toxic another person or difficult they can be, when a person goes to leave, there's still going to be that void left. And that can be really, really difficult for a person, especially if they've been in that relationship for 30 years. So if you can fill that void, kind of anticipate that and do some things to kind of, prematurely fill up that void. So if and when you do decide to leave, it's not going to feel like, oh my goodness, where did my life go? It's little smoother of a transition, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Thank you, Richter Customs. Thank you for the live stream donation. Says, thanks, Dana. What you do helps. I'm so glad for that. Thank you. Oh gosh, Dusty says, I keep rejecting the Hoover, but she is relentless. When do they give up? This Hoover is taking weeks. She keeps calling from different numbers. What should I do? Hold your ground. Hold your ground. Just keep blocking the numbers. Keep staying no contact. They're going to escalate. It's very much like a child having a temper tantrum. And you just got to hold your ground. You know, if you've ever had children or been around children and they really want something, and if you keep saying no, they're going to keep pushing that boundary. Then they're going to start crying, and then they're going to start, but I love you so much and you're the best ever. And, then they use pity, and then they use guilt, and then they use, I hate you. You're not, you're not my friend, or you're not my mommy or daddy or whatever. And they start getting really angry. And then it's oftentimes anger. Like they might start kicking or biting or throwing them, or I'll show you, I'm going to hurt myself, right? And they throw themselves on the floor, or they hold their breath, or they do these things. They keep escalating until the adult gives in and gives them what they want. It's the same thing with narcissists of any age. It's just really immature behavior. Like they want what they want and they're just trying to wear you down. So eventually, if you just keep ignoring them, they will kind of wear themselves out. And that's, hopefully leave you alone. But yeah, it's exhausting. Deanna says, I finally told my narc husband I want a separation and to sell the house, but he is avoiding the question, saying it's not a good time to sell, etc., not replying to my emails about the issue. Why is he doing this? It sounds like he doesn't want, he doesn't want to lose control. And that's really common in really any type of separation, divorce type of situation, especially for the person. Like if you're taking that control and you're like, you know what, this is it. I want a separation. I want to sell the house. I want to do these things to a person. So by you kind of flipping the script and you're like, okay, now I have all the power and I'm going to start taking back my power and making decisions. And this is what's going to happen. He's going to drag his feet. So I wouldn't expect him to work with you on this. I would go ahead, and if you want to separate, figure out a plan. Can you move out? Can you go stay at a friend's house? Can you stay on the couch? Can you, I would go talk to an attorney. I would go see about, what steps you need to make and get that ball rolling. And then I would just take it upon yourself to see what your attorney says, but, contact a realtor and, start getting some market analysis done on your property and some comparative things, and talk to the realtor about it and see what they say as far as selling. And because he might not want to sell the house, but if you're getting a divorce, and he might not have a choice in the matter. So I wouldn't wait to do something till he's okay with it. I would just do what you need to do and then protect yourself as much as you can along the way, physically, emotionally, and financially. Doug is here. Hello. He says, hi, Dana. I hope we are good. Sending light and love, healing and peace. Namaste, Doug. Oh, Doug, you're so awesome. Thank you for your healing, wonderful words. And yeah, and thank you for the live stream donation as always. Yes. Yes, Bonnie says, okay, this sounds like a wonderful book on boundaries. I definitely need that. I'm starting to move in the right direction. This book, and I'll be posting I was trying to get it done today and that just didn't happen, but it'll probably get done tomorrow. I'll be posting my book club notes on my website. So if you want to go there and check them out, thriveafterabuse.com is my website, and you can go to book club and there's a drop down menu for book club notes, and you can see my notes from that book. But the book is, it's like $3.99 on Kindle if you're an ebook reader, and it's um, like I said, it's a quick read, and I really like the way she lays stuff out. So uh, I think it'll help. And yes, Bonnie says we have to honor ourselves and stop being an overgiver, and we do. And and that's a thing that really that takes practice. For those of us, if we've been an overgiver our whole life and didn't even realize that we're people pleasing, or didn't have a sense of self, or we're so used to putting our wants and needs and feelings and all of that on the back burner, it's a huge process to really get back into alignment, like with who you really are. You know and it doesn't happen overnight, and there's a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error involved with it. But I'll tell you, it can be really cool, because situations will start to kind of slow down, and then you can realize, like, you just kind of replay them in your mind, and you can think, man, okay, I wish I would have done this differently, or I did a really good job with that, or uh, you just kind of have the ability to take a step back and see the situation with the more knowledge and practice you have. Let's see. Alex, okay, says, please, Dana, I am housebound after an 11-year abusive marriage and 34-year abusive family as the scapegoat. I have no support network. How do I get out of this on my own? I get panic attacks. Yes, okay. So I would encourage you to start building up a support network. If you are homebound, the internet is a wonderful thing. There's tons of groups out there that are free. I've got a support group on Facebook and on my website, both of which are called, my website's thriveafterabuse.com. And the Facebook group is also called Thrive After Abuse. So you can search for, and there's lots and lots of groups on Facebook, especially for, um, narcissistic abuse, and for children of narcissists, and those kinds of things. I would encourage you, join a handful, and that way you really can build up a fairly large support system quickly. And the beauty of online support groups is they're going 24 hours a day, because people live all over the world. And so that can be one, online resources would really be, I think, the way to go with that. And as far as like panic attacks and that kind of stuff, there's a lot of videos out there on like reducing anxiety. YouTube, there's tons of free videos out there on YouTube for getting rid of panic attacks and helping with anxiety and depression and insomnia, and all kinds of things like this. One of my favorites is Jason Stevenson. And there's another guy. What is his name? Michael Seeley. Those are two really just amazing guys who do like guided imagery and kind of relaxation and all of that. So you might want to check that out too. Hope says, I'm a Muslim and Islam forbids cutting family ties. There are many Muslims who have narcissistic family members who need help with what to do. Yeah. And that's really, I don't know. I wish I could give you a better answer on this, because I'm not familiar with Islam and faith. I do know that most religions, I'm more familiar with Christianity and how that's used to spiritually abuse people. But, at least in Christianity, there's a lot of talk about, um, you know, kind of basically cutting off toxic people. And kind of like the warning signs of manipulation and the warning signs of problematic people, and when forgiveness is appropriate and these kinds of things. So I don't know if I would imagine there's similar text in uh, Islam, but I would encourage you to do a Google search. I will Google some things as well online to see what I can find as far as spiritual abuse in Islam, because, like I said, and there's other faiths out there. I mean, I've actually emailed several times with different rabbis, which is very interesting to me. But I've had a few rabbis email me. Um, wanting to talk more about spiritual abuse in their community. And so kind of this is a thing, like a big thing, and in many different faiths. So I think, I guess the way that I look at it is, family are people that are there to support and nurture you. And if there's a difference between like a parent and a predator, or a sibling and a predator. And I think it's very important to kind of have that discernment between the two, because just because a person's born into a family doesn't mean that that's healthy for them. And I really am of the belief that God doesn't want anybody to be abused. So I feel like a lot of the um, scriptures or commandments or different tenets of different religion really kind of are limited to a you know a non-abusive family structure. If people are being forced into whatever, like all kinds of horrific situations, I just don't think that that's what God's plan is for anybody. So I guess for me, I really look at the word family, and think about that definition of like, well, what is family? If there are people that are using, abusing, exploiting you, then that's not family. So, and it's hard. I mean, it's hard when anybody walks away from abusive people, especially if it's kind of within these constructs of religion. People of any faith, I think, really struggle with this, where other people don't understand. And there is a lot of this guilt of, how can you leave? She's your mother. She's not getting any younger. If you're a Christian, you would forgive and forget, or you would, be more compassionate, or, these kinds of things. And it's oftentimes that well-intended bad advice that keeps people stuck in abuse. I'll be curious to hear if anybody else is listening to this video or this podcast, and they're Muslim, or they're familiar with Islam. Please comment down below as far as like your thoughts on that with religion, and if you have any resources for hope that I can pass along, let me know. And okay, Hope says, so it sounds like in the Muslim faith, you are allowed to go low contact. Well, if you have, I would encourage you to do what you have peace about doing. So if that would be the first step, would be to go very low contact, then I would encourage you. And if that's what you're like, this is what I need to do for my safety and my sanity, then by all means do that. you know there is no right or wrong way to do this. We talk a lot about going no contact, but everybody's situation is different, and this isn't about you doing like what I want you to do or what anybody else wants you to do. It's about you finding your own path and you doing what you feel is best for your situation. So, you know that's really what all of this really boils down to, is all each of us out there getting into our own alignment with like our wants and needs and feelings and emotions and instincts and all of that, and learning like, how do you feel when things are on track and when things are off track? How do you feel? Where are your boundaries and what's important to you, and like, where are your morals and values, and how do they come into play with things like this? And kind of what is appropriate guilt, and what is unnecessary guilt, and what is kind of this, what is it's carried guilt, really. It's where they're the ones that should feel bad about stuff, and then we feel bad because we're drawing the boundaries, and then we're feeling bad for them, you know. So I don't know, there's a lot to sort through, but that's the journey of all of this, is figuring out kind of where you stand in all of this. Bonnie says, yes, we have to get into emotional and spiritual alignment. Yes, it's a big thing, and it's a practice. Okay, let me scroll up here. Okay. Sorry, catching up on comments here. That's a really great question, Malta. And I would need to look into that a little bit more. The question was, Dana, can you speak about the differences between agoraphobia and social anxiety disorder? I would say, from my understanding of it, a lot of people that are agoraphobic, that, tend to really isolate, stay at home, kind of have a fear of public places, or a fear of, it can be so severe that they have a fear of really leaving their home. Many people that have agoraphobia also have anxiety disorders, but not everybody that has an anxiety disorder necessarily has agoraphobia, if that makes sense. So, and then let me also add to that too. It's very common for a person, if they've gone through anything traumatic, especially an abusive relationship of any kind, for them to want to isolate and to not trust people and to not want to be around people and to not want to leave the house. Like, that's very, very normal. And that can go on for quite a while. So I wouldn't call that necessarily like, maybe like temporarily agoraphobic, but it's more of they're just wanting to isolate, and because that's what people and animals do when they're in pain, they want to be left alone. They want to, especially, again, especially if they've been abused, where they're like, I don't know what happened. I thought this person was really great and they hurt me so incredibly bad, and now I don't know who to trust, and I don't trust myself. I don't trust my judgment or my instincts, and because I can't tell what's harmful versus what's helpful. I just want to be away from people. So that's very much a part of kind of the whole PTSD component that goes along with this. And but some people with like agoraphobia, sometimes that can just be more of a chemical thing. And my great grandmother, I never knew her, but she had agoraphobia, and didn't want to ever leave the house, and isolated, and it was very my she lived with my mother growing up. My mom said it was just a very, I don't know, very interesting childhood with her. I think she was also um, paranoid too. But uh, so anyways, sometimes medication can help with any of that, with anxiety, with agoraphobia. uh, Therapy oftentimes can really help, especially with PTSD. So there are things a person can do, but the challenge too with agoraphobia is if they're not wanting to leave the house, or if it's just causing such tremendous distress to leave the house, they might struggle with getting therapy. But also realize too, now with the internet, there's a lot of therapy that can be done um, online, which is really cool. So I hope that kind of helped a little bit. I'll look into that a little bit more. And again, I'll be curious to know down in the comments if there's anything that you want to add about that. Let me know. Okay, let's see. Oh, I agree. And the Fed says um, meditation increases emotional empathy. You'll find out how powerful meditation is in curing a lot of psychological and mental disorders. Yeah. I really feel that psychiatry is just beginning. I mean, it's such an interesting field, and we don't even come close to, our understanding of the brain and how it works and how everything is so interconnected, the whole mind body thing, and the impacts that stress and other situational stressors place on a person is just, I mean, it's just in its infancy. So there's a great book out there too that you might like, especially in the Fed, called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks a lot about basically how our body remembers, and kind of, we store our trauma in our tissues, basically. And so kind of how these different things come about, and kind of present themselves and manifest in a wide variety of ways. And um, mental illness and different psychiatric disorders are one of them. Stress is a huge thing. And if a person has mental illness, added stress can really exacerbate it, whether it's the anniversary of a significant person's death, can really exacerbate it, whether it's being in an abusive relationship, or starting school or finals week, or starting a new job, or getting fired from a job, or anything like that. Stress is does a huge number on the body, for sure. Oh, yeah. Shannon says, yeah, from this family thing, even some slave owners tried to use biblical scripture to justify slavery. Yeah. They People do that, whenever, and I think what's so important is for us to realize that any of us can fall into that too. It's so easy to see stuff that's so outrageous like that and think, "Oh, there's no way that would be me." There's no way I would have ever, been a Nazi soldier, or owned a slave, or anything that, to to us now, we're like, I remember reading about that stuff in school and was just horrified. Like, how on earth could anybody do that to another human being? I just don't get it. But if you can see how it does happen, then it can really help prevent it can help prevent a person from getting involved with an abusive belief system or an abusive person of any kind, because these things, it's a gradual process, and it's this kind of dehumanizing of another person. It's this idea of, like with slaves, like, well, they're somehow subhuman, so they because they're not really people, then they don't feel the same things that we feel, which is, again, like, if to a modern day person, that just is so outrageous, because of course people that are, people have feelings, right? But it was that same mindset that, you know happened with the Holocaust and everything else. And whenever people start dehumanizing other people to the point of, you know, enslaving them, or treating them poorly. And this goes back to, I think it's important for people to have kind of this moral code ahead of time. So if things start kind of taking a weird turn, that they can realize, okay, I'm not okay with this. And so we talk a lot about dignity and respect. And, these are kind of basic human rights. And prisoners, horrific prisoners that have committed horrific crimes, are still entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. And so these are some basic human rights that people have just because they're here and they're people. And it can be incredibly difficult to treat a person with dignity and respect when they've done horrible things. But it's not about whether or not they deserve it. It's about not letting their actions change us into becoming, like them. basically, is what it is. Yeah, and Bonnie says, yeah, I kept forgiving and believing him for 30 years. It was all a lie. And that's a tough pill to swallow. You try to think the best in people. Yes. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, normal, decent people tend to think other people are like them. You know, we all kind of go through life thinking, if I treat you a certain way, then you're going to treat me a certain way. And that's how that goes. And we're not taught that people, that people really vary, and that that life doesn't work like that. Just because we have a set of morals and values doesn't mean that other people have the same. And it doesn't mean that if we treat them with our morals and values, that that will be reciprocated. So, you know, it's quite the challenge it's just very eye-opening to realize that somebody can just sit there and just lie so easily and without conscience repeatedly about such. I mean, it's just terrifying to be like, how are we sharing a house or a bed and you just have lied about everything all the time, and it didn't even bother you in the slightest, or worse, it was fun. It was fun for you to see how much you could get me to believe. It's awful. So I was watching a YouTube video earlier today on cults, and again, it's the same. It's the same. It's the same. It's the same kind of mentality and vulnerabilities and how they get exploited, and people in cults, of course, like, when nobody thinks they're joining a cult, right? And they get into it and they're like, man, I finally found this amazing group of people and I feel so accepted here and everything is so great. And then kind of things, if you've got that cult leader at the helm who's, you know, got some really far out beliefs and who's all about power and control. This one gal was talking about this one group in California. It was actually like a yogi group, and she's like, this leader of the group had all of the makings of a cult leader, and when she began getting this following, she said it was just like, it was like lighting the match, like that was it, and then things just got really wild. And so I don't know, so it's I think it's so important for us to be able to be in tune with kind of ourselves and like where our deal breakers are and what we're comfortable with and what we're not comfortable with. And I even worry about kind of even within groups like this, uh, because it can very easily take a turn. It's got all of the makings for something that can, with good intentions, can turn problematic very quickly. You've got a group of vulnerable people. You've got a group of people that are, searching for answers, and, that want somebody to tell them like what's going on. And so that's one of the things that I really try to watch, because I don't want people to follow me. I want them to learn how to follow themselves. And I don't know. It's just, so I would just caution you with that, to not follow anybody in what they're saying without question everything. Question everything all of the time, and figure out what you think about things, instead of taking somebody else for face value, no matter how nice or kind or um, you know religious, or what have you. No matter how many things you might have in common with them, it's so important that we all think for ourselves, and um, be really clear on kind of what, like, kind of where our deal breakers are, because it's amazing stuff that people think, oh, I would never do that, that they end up doing. Like, and there's certain religions where uh, Scientology and Jehovah's Witness come to mind, where if a person doesn't follow the faith, then you know uh, um in Scientology, it's called, you're a suppressive person. So then they're removed from the group. And then you've got parents that don't talk to children anymore, children that don't talk to parents. And the only reason is because they don't have this belief system. And it's devastating. So, I think I don't know, it's important to get clear on that, because things that people think that they would never do in a million years, they end up doing if they don't kind of question the belief system along the way. Okay, let's see. Deb says, yeah, I've been with my now soon to be ex-husband for 4 years, married for one. Thought his gaslighting and lack of communication was due to first year marriage issues until he started devaluing, blaming me for his alcohol issues. Yeah, very common. That's okay. So this is another point I really wanted to bring up. So I'm glad you mentioned this, is to pay attention to how somebody is or is not accountable for their actions. So I see this a lot with, okay, so let's use boundaries as an example. So let's say if you try to set a boundary with somebody, okay? And you say, you know what, they get upset and they give you silent treatment, and they call, or let's say they call you names, right? And then they give you the silent treatment. And you want to try to work on this. And so you set this boundary of, hey, you know what? I know you got really upset the other night. You called me some names that really hurt my feelings. I don't appreciate being called names. And I don't like the silent treatment. Like, that's not okay with me. It's okay for you to take a time out, but to just drop off the planet, like, that's not going to work for me. And I want to have the kind of relationship where we have this, open and honest communication. And if they continue to fight that, and see how a person responds to you bringing that up, and trying to have that open communication. And if they fight your boundary of, well, I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't forgotten to buy kitty litter at the store, or I wouldn't have done that except, um, I saw that guy looking at you at the bar, or kind of, I don't know, whatever situation. If they're not owning their part in that, then you can expect that they're not going to change. Because in order for any of us to change, there has to be that level of awareness that there is indeed a problem. So if a person's going to change, because they might have grown up where that was the communication style, was yelling, screaming, or silent treatment, and name calling, and what have you. But this is what I'm saying. Like, it's not your job or responsibility to try to fix other people, because that's a long, hard, uphill road. And it's probably not even going to happen. But if, I would do, like, if you want to do it, like, I would just do it once and say, okay, that's not going to work for me. And then if they fight you on it, then there's your answer. Because of course they're going to keep happening, because in their mind, it's your fault that they acted that way. And that mindset is the problem. All of those other behaviors, the name calling, the silent treatment, the whatever, that's just a result of the mindset. But the mindset's the problem. And that mindset's really difficult to kind of break down and change. And so, like, a healthier approach would be is if somebody did say something, if they got really upset, you forgot to buy kitty litter, and they fly into a rage and they're screaming. And if you were to say, you know what, hey, I get that you're upset. I'm upset too. I don't really want to have to, none of us want to go back to the store. It's snowing out and it's late and we're tired. I get it. However, don't call me names. Like, I don't appreciate that, you know? And if a person's really trying to work on things, then they would be like, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. And then they really work to have that not happen again. But to just say words of, well, it's either all your fault, or, um, yeah, I'm sorry, but then it keeps happening. They're still not ready and willing and able to change. So then at that place, you have to kind of figure out, okay, where is my line in the sand? Like, how many times am I willing to go through being treated poorly before I actually leave? So, and this is why, because it's that mindset too of, yeah, but look at what you made me do. If you hadn't have forgotten to buy kitty litter, I wouldn't have had to yell at you or call you names or hit or kick the dog or whatever. Like, you made me do this. But when you're in the thick of it, it can really feel like, well, I guess that it's partly my fault. If I'd remembered to buy kitty litter, they wouldn't have called me names. But this is where personal accountability comes into play. And everybody makes mistakes and everybody gets frustrated. It's how a person deals with that frustration and anger. It's not okay to it's not okay to like berate or belittle or demean or devalue or diminish or grind down another person because they made a mistake. So, you know, yeah. Okay, Ingrid, thank you so much for the live stream donation. I appreciate it. And back to the whole thing too with the apologies and that accountability. They oftentimes have like this insincere accountability where a lot of them can really do a great job of, the whole crocodile tears and saying all the right things and these grand displays of, like, they seem to really get it now. And those can be the most difficult kinds because every single time it seems like they get it, but then the reality is either they don't change or they shift the blame onto something else. So maybe before it was they got upset and called you names because you forgot the kitty litter. Maybe it's next time they got upset and called you names because they were drinking. Maybe next time it was they got upset and started screaming at you because they had a bad day at work. Or you do see what I'm saying? So it's never their fault. And if it keeps happening, it doesn't matter what their reason is. It doesn't matter if they had a bad childhood or a bad day at work or had too many drinks or you did something, you quote unquote did something, because abuse, there is no excuse for it. And so they need to be responsible for their behavior. And it's not we can't control it. We can't stop the abuse. We didn't cause it. Like, none of that's on you. That's on them. Because there's lots of people out there that have forgotten to buy kitty litter or that have made mistakes and they don't get, verbally or physically or emotionally abused because of it. Okay, let me scroll up here. This tea is so good. I mentioned this before. It's so good. It's the yogi tea, if you're interested. It's Egyptian licorice. And I would be curious to know what people here, like from the UK, the expert tea drinkers of the world, what you guys think of this tea. I don't even know if you can get it. I know you guys are big Earl Grey drinkers, but my goodness, this, as they would say on my new favorite, my Britain baking show, this is just lovely. This is delightful. And it is. This tea is really, really good. Okay, Lauren, great question. Says, does anyone else feel like they have lost the spark in their personality as the result of narcissistic abuse? And has anyone got it back? Yes, I think that's very common. Actually, it's so common, I would say it's almost unusual for that to not happen to a person. So, myself included. Trauma is transformative. And when a person, there's a scene, what was it from the movie? I think it was Dances with Wolves, where one of the Native Americans, his name was something to do with, it was like happy or smiley or something. And he had witnessed kind of this massacre. And it was after that event, he just didn't smile anymore. And I just thought that was such a profound scene in that movie. And so, yes, this can happen to people. However, that is, I think, a very normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. It's a normal reaction to a traumatic situation is for it to transform a person in a way that almost leaves them kind of feeling shell shocked and or angry and bitter. paranoid, resentful, um, selfish, uh, feeling almost like that they have become a narcissist because now they want it to be all about them, and they just want to shut the world out. And um, they feel like that, yeah, that there's some major personality changes going on. That's 100% the result of trauma. So, and it happens with abuse. It happens with and any, if a person, let's say a child loses a parent, especially at a young age when they can't process what's going on. Very common for children to start acting out and become angry and withdrawn and um, violent, and they don't know how to process those emotions, those really adult emotions in that little body. So it's the same. It happens to everybody at any age, regardless of what they go through. Trauma is trauma, and trauma is transformative. But this is not to say that you have to stay at that place. And I think one of the most, how you kind of start to climb out of that dark hole is by making that declaration first and foremost of, I am not going to let this end my life. So if you're one of the many people out there where the idea of suicide is just kind of, you know, um, wafting in and out of your consciousness, to just take that off the table. Just don't even go there. Just off the table. So you're not going to let this end your life. Okay. And making that conscious decision. And then the second one is, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. Even if you feel like your life is ruined right now, make that your life's not over. So make that decision of, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. Okay. You don't need to have any clarity outside of that. And then the third decision is, I'm going to take what happened to me and I am going to use this from my highest and greatest good. I am going to squeeze out every single positive thing I can from this. And I am going to use this for me to get to that next level. Because if you're going to, stick around and you're going to live your life until its, natural end, then you might as well squeeze as much as you possibly can out of this event and out of every single event that comes your way. Because there's always so much that we can learn and apply and grow from, especially situations like this. Even though it might not feel like this at all, it might feel like, no, I have nothing to learn. I feel like I was in a hit and run accident, and I feel like emotionally devastated, and I feel radically changed for the worst. And I, I like, I feel like I'm just in a ditch, like in a deep, dark ditch, and I don't know how to get out. And feeling that way is very normal. But making these declarations, and then the fourth declaration is to decide, okay, I'm going to take this, and I'm not only going to use this pain for my highest and greatest good, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to use it for the highest and greatest good of others. And this doesn't have to be some sort of, like, you don't have to start a YouTube channel or write a book or any, start talking about this. Like, it doesn't have to be anything like that. It can be as simple as, you're having a bad day, and in realizing situations like this, when you're in so much pain and so many different things, it can make you that much more compassionate towards other people that are also experiencing pain. And so doing little things to help kind of spread that compassion of, like, we're all on this crazy journey we call life, and it's full of a wide range of experiences. But if you know, going and spending time visiting a nursing home, if you've got a friend that's going through a divorce, writing them a card, letting them know, like, hey, I'm just thinking about you, I just sending light and love your way. um, go volunteering at a local animal shelter. um, there is a cute project I would like to get started doing. This, it's called I think there's a website for it called Gratitude Rocks. And it's basically, you can find rocks like in your yard, and you just take paint any paint you have in your garage, or you can go to the dollar store and get some paint, and you paint them. And they're like little positive messages. And it's fun because, okay, so then you paint them. And if you want, you can, if you have a website, or if you, I don't know, however, like if you want to start, you could start your own Facebook page for this, right? And so you could write the Facebook page info on the back of the rock. And then you go out and you just leave the rocks around like Easter eggs, like you just leave them around town. And so when somebody finds it, and it's fun because like it kind of just puts a smile on your face while you're doing it, and it puts a smile on their face when they find it, and it just kind of spreads a little bit of sunshine in another person's day. And it really is amazing how kind of reconnecting with that light within ourselves, or with from our higher power, or whatever you want to call that, uh, and letting that just shine through you is so incredibly healing. So I think that's how you start to kind of get back and find yourself again, is squeezing as much as you can out of this, and also taking time out to kind of spread some sunshine in the world. And there's a lot you can get out of this. I remember when I was going through all this and I first came across, and I forget the website now. Um, it was a gal who had been married to a sociopath for 15 years, and full out double lie. He'd lied. He'd said he was like a pilot and a military colonel, I think, and just all kinds of things. And he ended up basically like draining her accounts and bankrupting her, and he'd lied about his name. And it was a similar situation to mine, except she'd been in it a lot longer. And it was her situation was just absolutely wild, and she had said that she really felt that in many ways that whole situation was a big part in like her kind of spiritual development, and that she learned, of course it takes a while when your person, because right when you're at, fresh out, you're so emotionally raw that you're just raw and you're angry, and that's okay. It's okay to be raw and angry. Like that anger is justified. But it's hard to think that anything good could possibly come from it, and it almost feels re-victimizing to think that anything good could come out of this. But down the road after that, anger has calmed down a little bit, and you can start realizing, okay, yeah, the reality is there's a lot that I can squeeze out of this. And not saying that what happened to me or you or anybody is somehow okay, or um, you know, like not trying to justify what happened by any stretch, but it is what it happened, and you're here. And so now let's make this work for you as much as we possibly can, just squeezing out as much as we possibly can. This is the time to you can really radically transform your life. And I've talked about this a lot of times before, like there's a tremendous amount of power in hurt and in anger. And it's going to be all in how you utilize that and harness that, because that hurt and anger, if it's running wild like a bucking bronco, yeah, it can cause a tremendous amount of damage in your life. But if you can harness it, you can, write that book you've always wanted to write, or get into amazing shape, or um, get organized, or plant a garden, or you can start kind of transmuting it so that anger doesn't have to stay anger, but it helps to process emotions by kind of working through them. And especially with energy, with emotions like that are so full of energy, to get that out, you know to like go to the gym and run, and to allow yourself to feel these emotions as much as you can. But if you can kind of harness this to where you can transmute it into something positive, you can take all that anger and rage and you can transform it into having an amazing garden. Or if you want to join me on this baking quest, right, we can imagine, like, you could become an amazing baker, or you could learn another language. Or do you see what I'm saying? Like there's so much that you can do when you can transmute it. So just because that anger because that anger and rage and that hurt, it wants, and I get it. It can go to a scary place where you're just like, I'm so angry and full of rage. I just want to see the world burn. And that can be a really scary place when a person who doesn't normally feel like that starts feeling like that, or when they start realizing, I'm feeling, this is not who I am. Like, I'm so full of anger and rage and hate that this is not me, and this is not the person that I want to be. So I'm I hope that was kind of a tangent, but I hope that helps. Love fraud. Yes, thank you, Deborah. That's exactly it. Donna Anderson. Yep. That was such an aha moment for me. That was the first time I'd heard that something good could come from this. That gave me so much hope because I did not realize that. I really felt like this awful thing happened, and here I am, and I'm just forever broken. It just did not occur to me that I could be in control of this, and that I was the author of my own story. I didn't need to let the trauma in my life dictate how my story was going to end up. Like, I could decide that. And then I had another good friend of mine who had made a comment years before. Uh, she was talking about, um, it was this moment of, she had a realization of living your life in chapters instead of, because it can feel like if it's just like one long life, that it's just this, especially if you're going through a really hard time, it can feel like it never ends. But then realizing, no, it's actually your life is a story, and it happens in chapters, and you're the author of it. And so you get to decide when that new chapter starts and when it stops, and who are the other kind of supporting characters in the story, and kind of what happens. And it's, you're in charge. So yes, Daniel says people will judge you by your anger. Be careful how you vent your anger. Yes. I think a great way to get a lot of that out is to, if you can, if you have a car or access, or even if there's nobody else in the house, you can turn on some really intense music. You can scream. You can punch your pillow. You can you go for a run. Get that energy out of your body, and until you just kind of wear yourself out. It really does help, instead of trying to pretend that it's not there. It's huge. Kendra says trying to explain narcissism to people is the worst. Yes, even people that you think would get it don't get it. I will tell you that from firsthand experience, from even working with, I was a psychiatric nurse and working with many other therapists, and we worked with a lot of sociopaths, people that, like, they would come into our clinic and they were diagnosed this, and still, just, it's so difficult to understand sociopathy unless you've lived with it, or narcissism unless you've lived with it. You know, it's just so frustrating. It's just so beyond frustrating, because people, and again, everybody thinks that they would see it. They're like, well, no, I would never allow a person to hit me, or I would never allow uh, myself to be treated like that. And it's like, you know what? Everybody thinks that. Nobody thinks they're going to get into an abusive relationship, or caught up in a scam, or join a cult, or follow some sort of crazy, religious ideology. Like, nobody thinks that. That's the problem, is because we all think it happens to just other people that are somehow like weak-willed, or what have you. But it's not. It's psychology, and everybody has vulnerabilities, and that personality type, like that narcissistic personality type, they see vulnerabilities and then they exploit them. And that exploitation happens little by little over time. And a person doesn't oftentimes realize what's happening, or if they do realize what's happening, they tend to feel really guilty about it. I'll tell you, here's some recent examples that have been in the news lately. I don't know if you guys follow. Hold on, I gotta reposition myself on this chair so I don't fall off. The One of the news stories has been about Louis C.K., the comedian, and he was just caught. Several, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 women have come forward, and he was exposing himself and then masturbating and in front of them. And I believe that he was not their equal. Like, he was either like the lead comedian, or he was either their boss, or there was some mm, kind of imbalance of power there. And um, he had asked, I don't know if he asked all of the women, but basically he'd kind of out of the blue, like, hey, I really want, is it okay if I masturbate in front of you? And some of the women said yes. And so this whole news story, so people were talking about this and they're like, well, but they said yes, so what's the problem? And I'll tell you what the problem is, because this is this is how this stuff goes down. So people handle stressful situations and getting knocked off balance like that in a wide variety of ways. There's a whole fight, flight, freeze, or friend are like the top 4 ways. And so some people, if they're in that fight mode, they might instantly think, "What? No, you're crazy. No way." And they get angry and they leave. Fight, so that might fight mode might be they become aggressive. Flight mode might be like, what? And then they just pack up and they leave. um, Freeze might mean they don't do anything. They just shut down and they're just like, they're because they're so knocked off balance. Or friend is they might agree to something because they don't know what else to do. And everybody has their own kind of defense mechanism to situations like this. Mine personally is friend. I've been in situations like that before. Not that extreme, but I've been in like really inappropriate situations, and I didn't know what to say, and my default answer was okay, yes. And then I felt an incredible amount of like shame and guilt, because I felt like, well, I allowed it to happen. But the reality is, knowing what I know now about like the brain and everything, different people handle things differently. His behavior is outrageous. In no way, shape, or form is it okay to just push something like that on a person. Like, if you wanted true consent, you wouldn't be doing that. Like, it just, you'd be having that conversation ahead of time. Do you know what I mean? Where it's not under duress, where it's not under, a person's not under stress, where there is no imbalance of power. Like, it was wildly appropriate across the board. So, but that's how it happened. Like, it's just these little, and that's a big, situation, but like, it it's just the people kind of get knocked off balance. Like, things start to get really kind of strange out of the blue, and then they don't know like what to say or do. And because it's just, they get knocked off balance emotionally. So, and then they start justifying it to themselves or to other people or what have you. And that's when things get really crazy really fast. Yeah, Barbie says, yeah, in my opinion, I can say I've seen a lot of NPD people that seem to have a lot of fetishes that some would find crazy or disturbing, so they hide them a lot. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think a lot of times it's just about that power and control. And I think too, if a person doesn't really tend to feel deep emotions, then odds are they probably are bored a lot of the time because they don't have there isn't that fulfillment that comes from like friends or a relationship or maybe even hobbies. It's everything's just kind of surface level. So like your level, like your depth of, your 100% might only be like their 100%, let me say this way, their 100% might only be your 10%. So if everything is just really superficial, they might need really extreme things in order to feel anything, whether that's causing pain, whether that's causing crazy making, whether that's causing, it's sex, it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's you name it. They might need that because that's the only way that they're kind of getting, um, really feeling anything. Yes, Maria, great point. She says, "Oh, yeah, reading the comments on a Joe Rogan video where he's talking about Louis CK, the men in the comments do not see it as abuse because he asked." And it's not only the men, it's a lot of the women too. So that was another thing that I found really disheartening is people truly do not understand like why certain things are problematic. Here's another example of this. So if for those of you that are South Park fans, there's the latest episode, I think of what is it, season 21 or something? The latest season of South Park is very triggering, so I don't recommend watching it if you're fresh out, but they do a fantastic job of showing what an abusive relationship is like. And so the character Cartman, who is basically, he's a narcissist and maybe even more on like the psychopathic side of things, but like very incredibly narcissistic. And he gets a girlfriend named Heidi. And in the show, if you're familiar with the show, Cartman is this really selfish, he's spoiled, he's selfish, he's just this rotten, bratty, entitled, manipulative, awful child. And they really do such a good job with kind of showing this. And his mother is kind of the stereotypical, she's enabling, she spoils him rotten, it's all about him. He has no rules, he has no consequences. He begs and pleads until she caves in. They actually did a great episode, this was several years ago, about he was so out of control that his mom brings in what's his name, Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer, to train Cartman. And that's a fantastic episode. If you're a South Park fan, you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's hilarious. But these newer episodes they really show really well like how a narcissist can be and how they flip that switch and it's all about power and control. And so then Cartman's girlfriend in the show, she's this young girl. She's incredibly sweet. She's vegan, very trusting, sees the good in him, hopes that he can change. And so doesn't realize like how much disdain and contempt he actually has for her. And so he's telling his friends kind of this one thing about her, like, oh, guys, she's so controlling, she's so manipulative, like, blah, blah, blah. And she's not like, she's trying to be assertive and like treat it like a normal relationship and have boundaries and, wants to go do things with him and spend time and he just can't handle it. But then she finally breaks up with him and then he calls her crying and all of the guilt and the manipulation and just it's really, really accurate. And so, but then even more accurate. So then the show starts making these parallels between, so all of Cartman's friends start seeing it and they're like, dude, Cartman is such a jerk. Like, why is Heidi with him? And they're trying to get through to Heidi, but she so manipulated, like they're not getting through to her. And then somebody says, I feel like we're all in a relationship with Cartman. And they're talking about, then the story goes to Donald Trump and how outrageous his behavior is and how scary of a dude he is. And so they just really nailed it. Well, anyways, so I was looking for some clips that were like not so triggering to share in the group. And so I was on YouTube and I was reading the comments about those episodes and like nobody seemed to understand that this was an abusive relationship. my jaw was just on the ground. I'm like, oh my God, like this is a slow pitch. Like people, how do you guys not see this? This is such a parody of an abusive relationship. Like it's satire. Like, how do you guys not see this? And people were making comments like, oh, it's so great that Cartman finally gets a girlfriend and I really like them together. And I'm like, wow. But you know what though? I don't know why I'm surprised, because people don't see it like with the Joker and Harley Quinn. You know, that's a horrific abusive relationship. You know, he gets into her mind, he shoves her in a vat of like acid. You know, he threatens to kill her, he threatens to leave her. You know, she has to do all these things to earn his love, and yet nobody sees this as a problem. They see, if anything, they see it as like, this is romantic, this is this ideal relationship. Same with 50 Shades of Grey. So it's just, people really don't get it. And if they don't get it in like, you know, again, like that, the whole thing with the Joker and Harley Quinn, and especially the South Park episode where Cartman's even like looking behind her back and making faces and doing all this stuff. Like if it's still not registering, then like we have a lot of work to do as far as like getting people to really get that this is a problem. And it's just really frustrating. Yeah, Maria, people just, they don't see it. They don't see it. Bonnie says we need more satire. It would actually be a great learning tool. I think you know, cartoons and things like that can be a really great learning tool, because it gives people that emotional distance and it presents it in a way that's not so um, people are so like don't readily identify with it. So it kind of creates that emotional distance. The YouTube the YouTuber James, who does the Be Good, what is it, Be Good 4000, I think, his channel. It's a lot of kind of computer simulated things. And for a while, I don't know if he's still doing this or not, but for a while he was doing skits about different kinds of scenario with like abusive situations, oftentimes like abusive parents. And just the dialogue, like I think he really had it down, and so it was very educational to kind of to watch that, like the dynamic between a narcissistic mother and their child, or um, you know, kind of whatever dynamic and how it played out. There was an old uh what was it, like magazine of sorts, I guess, called the Highlights when I was a kid, and they had a comic strip in there that I thought was really great. It was called Goofus and Gallant, and it basically showed, you know, two kids. One was called Goofus, one was called Gallant, and how they handled the same situation differently. And I thought that was, of course, doing what I do now, I think that was brilliant. But I really liked it as a kid, and I think it really does kind of help to teach morals and values, because again, that stuff's not really taught anymore. So, but they would have like little, oh, like a situation might be both of these boys walk across this, maybe an old man drops his wallet, and Goofus would look around and take the wallet and put it, you know, put it in his jacket and think, haha, my lucky day. And whereas Gallant would pick up the wallet because he saw the guy drop it, and would run over and say, excuse me, sir, you dropped your wallet. And then the whole, of course, the whole moral of the story was be like Gallant, don't be a sociopath. Like, don't be like Goofus, be like Gallant. And it was really, it was just, I don't know, it was good. Good that that stuff was being taught. Yeah, Bonnie says, yeah, I love the Highlights for Children magazine also. Deb says, I actually watched the episode with my abuser before I realized that I was being abused. I thought it was inappropriate, but my abuser thought it was hilarious. Yeah. And so that's another really telling thing, is what a person finds funny. If it's really stuff, you know, like I just, to me, it always concerns me if a person finds they take like it's one, I don't know. If stuff is dark, it's one thing to be like, if you laugh at it, you're like, man, that is really wrong. And you're laughing because it's so wrong that you can't believe they would make fun of that. Right. But then another thing to get some sort of sadistic joy out of it, and then to not realize like why, like actually like why that's funny. Do you see what I'm saying? So it can be very telling. Those are can be some of the earliest signs is how people react to stuff like that. You know, yeah, just kind of sadistic fun or what people think is actually fun. Or um, I was watching another video earlier today, as a matter of fact. I don't know, it's just some stupid video I came across of pranks that left people dead or something. And one of them was, uh, some kids were dropping like large rocks off of the freeway because they thought it was funny to like smash people's windshields. Or another kid had wrapped up a stop sign in, they'd wrapped it up in saran wrap, and then it ended up causing a fatal accident. And then it went on and on and on. And you just kind of think like, causing harm to other people like that's not funny. And it's not funny to hurt animals. It's not funny to hurt kids. It's not funny to hurt people. That's sadistic. So Phil says, how do you know if you are a narcissist yourself from being raised by narcissists? Well, it's a real narcissism, like really any personality disorder is really difficult to kind of self-diagnose because we're too close to it, right? So, and for the most part, none of us, every person tends to go through life thinking that uh, the way that we think and do and act is a normal, reasonable way to do things. If we're acting out of alignment, so our thoughts and always equal our actions, and our actions will always equal our thoughts. If those two things don't line up, then we experience cognitive dissonance, which is that mental distress because we're acting in a way that's out of alignment based on our beliefs. So our beliefs always equal our behavior always equals our beliefs. So that's why it's really difficult for us to tell oftentimes if there's a problem, because if our behavior is getting worse and worse and worse, in order for us to ease that cognitive dissonance, we have to start changing our beliefs about our behavior. And so then what you start seeing is a person starts rationalizing things to a point of like, ridiculousness, because in their mind, they need to be right. Because if we're acting in a way that we don't feel is right, then that's going to cause a lot of mental distress. And so people have to rationalize that, unless you're a complete psychopath to the point where you don't care if it's right or wrong, you just act in however way you want to act and you don't feel the need to justify it. Where those kinds of psychopaths are like, most narcissists and sociopaths and even psychopaths will justify it. Like, yeah, well, look at what you made me do. You broke up with me. That's why I set your house on fire. Or you broke up, um, whatever, like you did this. And so you forgot the kitty litter. That's why I had to beat you up, or that's why I yelled at you. Like to them, but they have a reason for it. Not saying that it's the correct reason, but they always have a reason for it because they need to. Because if they didn't have a reason for it, if they're like, I just beat you up because I felt like it, then odds are that's going to cause a person like mental conflict, because people need to, we have to go around thinking that what we're doing is right, or there's that mental distress. So I guess the point being is it's really hard to see, it's really hard for any of us to see ourselves clearly. Um, what is very common is, and this is why narcissism and sociopathy and these kinds of things, can be really difficult to diagnose. And they're oftentimes diagnosed without that clinician ever even meeting that narcissist or that sociopath, because they're hearing narcissism, which is at the core of sociopathy and psychopathy. Narcissists, if they never ever think that they're wrong, if they continue to rationalize and justify things that a normal person wouldn't, right? I mean, we all know if we can anybody can rationalize anything, but at the core, deep down, we know that what we've done is wrong. If they're continuing to justify things, then if they're oftentimes diagnosed when the people around them are starting to go into therapy, or generally going into therapy. So if they're going into therapy and they're telling the therapist, yeah, I'm like, this is what's going on, oftentimes then the therapist would most likely say, wow, what you're describing to me is this person sounds like a narcissist or a sociopath or a psychopath. But sometimes a therapist won't say that because they don't want to give a diagnosis, without seeing the person. But 9 times out of 10, the person's been out of the picture for many years, but this person's still incredibly traumatized. And then when they start describing it, that's when they're like, well, what you're describing sounds like a narcissist or a sociopath. So that's how most of them get diagnosed. So it's not like obviously an official diagnosis, but it's a pointer of this is a legitimate problem. And it's that first kind of wake up call that a person has of, oh, wow, other people are not like me. Like, I just thought everybody else was a normal, decent human being. And, that I had to work harder to get through to them because normal, decent people would actually want to change, and they don't want to change. It's just, this stuff isn't taught. And so people get caught up in it, But anyways, so to answer your question, how do you know, like within yourself, we all have stuff that we could work on, frankly. And especially if a person comes from a dysfunctional family, like odds are you picked up dysfunctional ways of relating to other people. And so I think to save people time, because what tends to happen is then people kind of go on this path of, well, how do I really know if my family was dysfunctional, or does this count as dysfunction? And then they kind of get caught up in like wanting to this kind of black or white thinking of, does this count as dysfunction? And like, what do I have within me that's really dysfunctional? And then they're kind of just spinning in these circles. To think about it in terms of, odds are you picked up some really screwed up messages along the road. I think it's next to impossible for anybody to be over the age of 15 without getting some really damaging messages, whether that's from friends, family, school, religion, books, movies, media. There's all kinds of stuff out there. Like I was saying earlier, the Joker and Harley Quinn, or fairy tales even for little kids, or ideas of what love is and what appropriate behavior is, and all of that. So odds are, you do have some stuff within you. I have some stuff within me. We all have stuff. It's about kind of doing that kind of honest, like, moral inventory of, and I think getting clear on like, what kind of man do you want to be? Or for like, gals out there, what kind of woman do you want to be? And realizing that your past does not have to define you. That might have been, that's the default for most people. We have this trauma that happens, it transforms us, and then we just kind of end up how we end up. And all of this happens subconsciously. It just happens by default. Some people turn out to be saints, and some people turn out to be serial killers. Like, it just kind of how the cookie crumbles, but it doesn't have to be that way. There can come this point where, if you're finding that there's a lot of qualities within yourself that you're like, you know what, there's a lot of things about me that I don't like. Like, I don't, if you're like, I don't like that I have such bad road rage, or that I get so upset with my mother, or that I anything, right? That I'm so bad with money, or that that I am so obsessively tidy, or that I'm so messy, or that I drink too much, or that I don't leave the house, or whatever it might be, to really get clear with yourself of like, okay, well, what's going on in your life that you would like to change, and then realizing that you do have the power to change that. But the tricky part with change is that it's oftentimes it's not a like linear process, you know. I mean, ask anybody that's tried to make a major change, right? Like if you tried to quit smoking or stop drinking or become more organized or lose weight or gain weight or whatever it is, it takes kind of making that decision and then kind of developing the habits in order to for those that new way of being to actually become a pattern and a routine and a new way of life. And it's difficult, and oftentimes it's one step forward, two steps backwards, and reevaluating, and then you know it's change is a messy process. But there's a term out there called fleas. And so whereas like a person who's truly personality disordered, it's like a pervasive and persistent pattern of problematic behavior. So pervasive and persistent, it's ongoing, and it's kind of woven how through their life. So how they are, it's not just with you. Like they kind of, it's the whole like wherever you go, there you are. So, if they've got this craziness within them, that craziness is going to come out in like a wide variety of ways. They might be able to hide it better in certain situations, but over time, their personality bubbles to the surface and people start to see them for what they really are. Versus a person that has fleas, and that term comes from like, if you lay down with dogs, you're going to get fleas, kind of a thing. If you're in a dysfunctional family, if you hang out with dysfunctional people, you're going to pick up dysfunctional ways of interacting and thinking and feeling and everything else. So the good news is with fleas is you can get rid of them. So it does take an awful lot of work, because again, it's really difficult for us to see where our own issues are. Uh, this is kind of the benefit, I think, a lot of times of group work or being in support groups, because it's so much easier to see everybody else's issues, right? It's so much easier to see kind of their thinking that's concerning or problematic, or um, questions that they bring up, or situations that they've gone through. And so then we can, because all of us, we are our own baseline for normal. And that can really be a problem if you grew up in a den of dysfunction and normal was getting yelled at, beaten, cussed out, ignored, um, parents drank or passed out, or do you know what I mean? Like if normal was chaos, and if normal was yelling and screaming and hitting and God knows what else, then it can be really hard for a person for that to register to a person as these are not normal relationship issues. Like this is outrageous stuff. And so for that to register as a problem can take a person a while. And again, it's because change is not a linear process. There's oftentimes it's like, okay, so like some generally it's the thing that gave us the most pain is going to register as a problem. So for a person, it might be drinking, or it might be yelling. And so you might see some of that stuff within yourself of like, you know what, geez, my mom used to drink a lot. And now I swore when I was a kid, I would never drink, or I would never drink like that. And I drink just as much as she does. And so that's registering as a problem. But here's the thing, then this is it's painful, but it's like just personal growth on steroids. Is it's like pulling like a thread on a sweater, because it's that opening, it's that realization of, that's a problem. And then you start kind of getting into it, and you're like, you know what? And then that's a problem too. And then that's a problem too. And then that's a problem too. And that's some other stuff that I really want to iron out within myself and um, kind of get figured out. So Mm. Phil says, yeah, that's just it. I'm the opposite of my parents. They made me feel retarded, but with my child, I build her up constantly. But I have noticed that I do like to yell when I'm upset with others, just not with my child. Okay, so first off, yay you for building up your daughter. That's in your child. If you have multiple children, I don't know, building up your children and breaking that cycle of that realization of how my parents treated me was outrageous. I'm never going to do that to a child. That's huge. So, yay, you for that. And then, so now it's going to be if you're realizing, like, you know what? I yell at people. Like, when I get upset, if I get cut off in traffic, if somebody's, taken up way too much time in the checkout lane, if there's, my neighbor does something, or if my friend does something or whatever, I tend to yell. Okay, now it's going to be, if that's something that you want to work on, now that that's in your awareness of, okay, this is something that I want to change. I really think one of the biggest first steps in that is just really taking that off of the table. Just being like, it's not okay to yell at other people. And and of course on some level you know that, right? But also realizing it's not only is it not nice to do to them, it's not fair to do to yourself. Like you're getting yourself all riled up and your blood pressure's going up and you're getting yourself all worked up and into a bad mood. And so it's not fair to them and it's not fair to yourself. And so to think, okay, how can I handle things ahead of time? So maybe if there's certain triggers that are like certain commonalities between these different situations, to really kind of explore that and then to anticipate, like, okay, how am I going to handle this next time around? So here's kind of some quick things I'll just throw out there. So with road rage, you can tell yourself, because a lot of times when we explode like this, when we get so upset, it's because we're feeling attacked. Like they're doing this to us. And in the reality, most of the time, people aren't, it's not a direct attack on us. They've got their own stuff going on. So let's use the example of road rage. So if somebody cuts you off, right? And they're going 90 and they're on your tail and they're honking and they're flipping you off and they go around and they're flipping you off some more. And if like anybody is going to get really upset in that situation, instead of taking that as a direct attack on you, because they don't know you, they do not know you well enough at all. Really, they don't know you at all. They don't know you well enough to hate you to that level. So it's not personal. It's just some random person who's having an absolutely rotten day. I tell myself, I'm like, you know what? I bet you they have explosive diarrhea. Like that's what I tell myself. They must have food poisoning so bad that they've got to go 90 miles an hour and honk their horn and zig in and out of traffic because they have got to find the toilet. And thinking that almost kind of makes me giggle, but it also makes me realize it's not about me, right? Like whatever they've got going on in their life. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they're just like that and they have a short fuse and whatever. It doesn't matter. But what matters is realizing that it's not about, like, you don't have to react in an aggressive way. Life is so much easier when you don't take other people's stuff personally. It really is. But it takes practice. Um, but if you can dig deep and kind of figure out, okay, what's going on, because whenever people, because again, this lines up, our beliefs always have to match our behaviors. That's a common thing for anybody. And so it's really easy for people, if we do something, we can always justify it, right? But realizing that nobody else is causing us to behave a certain way. So, more of that kind of narcissistic or like that fight response is that, but yeah, but look at what you made me do. And when we can all get in that mindset, like I talk oftentimes about like being at the grocery store, and if I'm really hungry and I'm hangry and people are moving slow and they're like writing a check and they're letting their 4-year-old put things on the conveyor belt because they think it's cute. And you know what I mean? And I'm like, come on, lady, like I'm trying to get out of here. I'm starving. And if I were to like yell at her, I could totally work up a justification for that. She's taking a long time. What are you doing? Why are you letting your 4-year-old put stuff on the belt and you're writing a check and it's Sunday afternoon and come on, and I could feel entitled to be like, well, I wouldn't have had to yell at her if she was, didn't act like that. But if you can interrupt that pattern and realize, yeah, it's like other people are going to act how they're going to act, but then we still need to be in charge of our behavior. So it's still not okay. Even though she's doing all of these very annoying things, it's still not okay for me to yell at her or to call her names or, to be pushy. And really, there's seriously, it's so life changing to just realize that um, there's very few things in life that are really worth getting riled up over, truly. It's just not worth your time and energy, but it takes practice. Very good point, Shannon. Shannon says, I also think if you're worried that you're a narcissist, it's probably a pretty good indicator that you're not. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think a lot of people, myself included, when I began really diving into this, because I think it's very normal for a person to think about stuff like this in very black and white terms. Like either a person is a narcissist or they're a normal person. Like a person's either a vampire or they're not. And it's not so cut and dry like that. Like narcissism, it just like, a lot of other type of behaviors, um, it's on the range of like normal human behaviors. It's kind of the degree and frequency that's the problem. And this is another challenge people have when they start getting things back in alignment with like boundaries and everything else is they start feeling like, well, I feel like I'm a narcissist. Like if I have big goals and if I want to do things and um is that me being grandiose? And um is it okay for me to have wants and needs and to assert myself? And here's the added thing to this is then other people around you, especially if you are, kind of swimming in a sea of dysfunction, they're not going to be okay with you setting boundaries. So now all of a sudden you're telling them no and you never have before. And they're going to be like, you're so selfish. You're so self-absorbed. It's all about you. And then that can really mess with a person's head because they're like, well, then maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am the narcissist. But there's a term out there called healthy narcissism. And it's basically where it's the attitude of like, well, why not me? And why not now? Like, why not me? And why not you? Like, we can, if you can do it, I can do it. Like I can figure out a way. My goals and my feelings and my wants and these things matter and they matter just as much as yours. And I'm going to go after it and I'm going to run down my dreams and I'm going to go do these things. That's like a healthy degree of narcissism. Problematic narcissism, where it's when that starts turning into the me at the expense of you. And or at a more severe level, like me at the destruction of you. So it's one thing to be competitive and to have that like fight response when it's appropriate. If you're on a softball team, if you're watching football, you know what I mean? Like on a Sunday afternoon, if you're in business and, you're trying to get another account and you're like, you're trying to win at certain things. Like there's a time and place for it, but to try to have that fight reflex within like your interpersonal relationships with like your children or your spouse, where you've got to be right all of the time and you're going to just browbeat the other person down into submission anything, any individuality that they show, if they don't agree with you. And again, a lot of this is like kind of normal stuff, right? Like we all do things because we think we're right. So if it's we any one of us has a hard time if somebody has a different religion or different ideas for parenting, or um, a different way at even like baking brownies, or do you know what I mean? Like if the people do things differently, we tend to kind of hold our ground and think, well, that's not the way I do it. It's hard, it can be very difficult to kind of be open enough to not only hear another person out, but to even just kind of hold that space and agree to disagree. It can be very it's difficult, and to become aware of, okay, am I feeling the need to like wrestle this person to the ground, down to the ground, like verbally or emotionally every single time we fight? um there's a problem there. We were talking, my boyfriend and I were talking about this the other night about, I don't remember how we got on the topic of it, but like fighting fair. And um one of the challenges with narcissists is they don't fight fair. And because I think in their mind it's very much this, they fight to win. And so they throw out, and it's very normal if a person's in a verbal confrontation with somebody, whoever it is, it's very common. If somebody perceives that they're getting a rock thrown at them, then the next person grabs a brick, right? And so that, and it just keeps escalating. For narcissists, they'll start throwing out everything they have, and they go low, and they go for like things that would be the most embarrassing or humiliating, or that really pack a punch to just, Trump does this nonstop with his tweets with people. And if somebody even kind of says something even slightly snarky, he fights below the belt. He'll talk about, oh, well, you should have seen her, she was all bloody from her facelift, and things that are embarrassing and humiliating, and they're designed to embarrass and humiliate. And so, that kind of stuff, like, it's one thing to fight, but it's another thing to actually try to embarrass or humiliate or like emotionally devastate another person. Like that's not okay. And if a person's doing that, then that shows us a huge sign of like emotional immaturity. And trying to get through to a person that doesn't see that there's anything wrong with that is next to impossible, because in their mind they feel justified in doing it. So yeah, it's exhausting. Bonnie says, my narc has major road rage. I'm afraid to drive in the car with him. Yeah, a lot of them do. And I think a lot of it's just, it's their way or no way. And it's that, and what's scary is it's that level of, they're impulsive, and it's almost kind of like this teenage mentality of, they don't think anything's going to happen. Like they don't think about consequences, whereas like normal adults think about, like, I really shouldn't go 90 or tailgate somebody or do these things because, for all of the obvious reasons, right? But for them, it's like they just, like, they don't, it doesn't compute for them. And it is terrifying. Shannon says, the exercise enthusiast who I made fun of in the mid 90s as a teenager was Susan Powder. She was the Stop the Insanity lady. Or Seinfeld's, for Seinfeld's fans, George's dad yelling out "Hoochie Mama" as a stress buster. Yeah, he used to also say "Serenity Now." Do you remember that episode? I love that episode. But there's a lot of truth to that, of interrupting the pattern. So, with George's father, when he would start getting stressed out, because that whole episode, he's like, I'm going to therapy, like I'm going to control this. And, he just would go from 0 to 10. And so he's telling, he starts screaming. He's like, oh, it's serenity now, serenity now. And George is like, are you supposed to be yelling it? And he's like, and then the dad was like, I don't know, the therapist didn't say. He just kept screaming, serenity now. And he's like, it works, it works. And but yeah, just kind of interrupting that pattern, being in tune of when when you do get really upset. And that's the first step, is just being aware of it, because it can feel very justifiable in the moment. And it's a game changer when you realize uh, that just because you are frustrated or angry or upset or what have you, doesn't mean that you have to lash out at somebody, or try to engage in trying to verbally wrestle them to the ground and get them to see things your way. That you know it doesn't have to be that way. P. Lawson says, yes, how do you get out of being financially crippled in the fight? Well, I think I missed part of this conversation. I guess um if you're talking legal battle, I would always encourage you to anticipate as much as you possibly can when you're dealing with a person that's manipulative and who doesn't have um, a moral compass, and who feels entitled and justified to do whatever they want to do. I would talk to an attorney and see what you can do to really prepare yourself financially as best as you possibly can, and to really understand that this kind of personality type doesn't play by the laws or the rules of any kind. For them, it's very much, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to beg for forgiveness, or I'm going to give some sort of half assed apology or crocodile tears, or I'm going to manipulate, or I'm going to blame, or I'm going to deny. And it's a whole exercise in crazy making. So you're best off if you can anticipate as much as possible and just realize that they're going to do what they're going to do, and to not um, think, to not project your sense of morals and values onto them, because they're not the same as you. Yes. Oh, I like how you said that, Maria. Maria says, yes, healthy narcissism. It's a beautiful toolbox for everyone to have, being centered with hobbies and passions and focused on your goals in life. It's not a side dish, it's the main course in our life. Yes. Yes. And that's a big aha for a lot of people, because, I think especially for a lot of us that have been involved with narcissists, maybe even had narcissists as parents, we learned at a very early age that what we want doesn't matter. Or if it does matter, it's on the back burner. And so if we kind of go through life, and I think as parents fall into this all the time, right? Because then your life really does become about your children. And if you had children young, then kind of really truly developing that sense of self, if you ever had it to begin with, also takes the back burners. Then your life's all about your children. And then a lot of times people, they call it the midlife crisis, but then people kind of get to their 40s and they're like, well, who am I? And their life has always been about somebody else. So a very eye-opening thing. But yes, if you can realize that, uh, it's relationships are wonderful, and they really are a big part of what makes life great. But realizing that your wants and your needs and your feelings and your hobbies and all of this stuff is such a big part of you. It's an expression of who you are. And that's what the thing about boundaries is. Boundaries helps to allow for that expression to happen, so then that's how you can live an authentic life. So it just starts with really getting in tune with that. And again, this is stuff that we're not taught. And if we're taught anything, it's oftentimes the opposite. So it's no wonder people are so, twisted around with all this stuff. And that's a really great point. Again, Maria says, yeah, in codependents oftentimes have an extremely harsh inner critic. Yes. Yes. We tend to feel guilty about everything and not good enough about everything. And That's for, I think, for probably a wide variety of reasons, but it's hard to kind of get that voice in check, and oftentimes takes self-talk on a regular basis of, I mean, I even today, like I still do this all the time. I'm like, Dana, because I write these impossible to-do lists, and I keep telling myself that I'm going to stop doing that because it's that, not helpful. And I get so upset with myself because there's all these things that I want to do, and I have trouble focusing and prioritizing and blah, blah, blah. And I get overwhelmed, and it's just, I get so frustrated with myself. And, but slowing down and being like, Dana, like, you do a lot, and this is what you did good. And just like acknowledging that. And it might feel really silly at first, but it's healthy, and it's important that you can see like what you've done. And I think a lot of us too, if we're really driven, we kind of want those. And I think this is a societal thing too, because people just want it now, right? So if we don't have that result now, then we can oftentimes feel like there's something really wrong with us, like, well, why isn't this happening now? And why is it taking me so long? And you just being so hard on yourself. It's awful. Okay, somebody was asking about Thanksgiving. So, and how to handle Thanksgiving with people like this. So, and anticipation is our number one thing. So, anticipating as much as you possibly can for kind of what you're going to be walking into. It's the whole like Lucy and Charlie Brown situation. Lucy promises to hold the football. Charlie Brown is like, okay, I'll play. I really want to do this. And he runs back and he runs to go kick the football. And then Lucy pulls it out at the last minute. And then, Charlie Brown falls flat on his back. Holidays are often like this when you're dealing with a dysfunctional family. Like, we keep holding on to hope that things are going to be different, and they never ever are. So if you can anticipate, see things how they really are, not how you want them to be. So, because the only way to stop the insanity is to see the cycle for what it is, to realize Lucy thinks it's hilarious to pull the football away at the last minute. And she's not going to stop doing that because she doesn't realize she has a problem. Not only does she not realize she has a problem, she thinks it's hilarious. So she's not motivated to change it. So if you're walking into a family dynamic like that, realize this is what I'm walking into. So now that if you're going to get real about it, like, what are some of the things that you're going to be most likely walking into? Are they Oftentimes people tend to kind of pick on the same few things. Oh, are you still a vegetarian? Oh, are you, it might be like your weight, if you're married or if you're single, like your relationship status, your educational status, um, if you have children or don't have children, if what are they critical of, I guess. And then to anticipate that, and then to maybe anticipate how you're going to respond to that, because it's a lot easier to respond if you've kind of practiced this stuff ahead of time, instead of being in the moment and then being knocked off balance and not knowing what to say. So, if you have a certain relative that always makes um and it totally depends on you, like how you want to react to this. If you want to really draw like a firm boundary, if you want to kind of draw a boundary, but then kind of laugh about it. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's totally up to you and your approach. So, and how much you want to say. So if a family member were to say, oh, hey, are you still a vegetarian? Or are you still doing that vegetarian thing, as I tend to get, then you could just say, yep, you know, and then just nip it in the bud. And then if they want to debate the point, because I think every vegetarian or vegan gets this all the time, or people then want to debate with you about this. Like, well, but then but you'd still do this or you still do that. And they're trying to kind of find some sort of like hypocrisy in your, you know, belief, basically to make themselves feel better is what it is. But like, if they want to, like, you don't need to argue about it, right? Like, if you believe what you believe, like you know, whatever. So you can just disengage. and either if they're like, well, but then you still, I was talking to somebody the other day and they're like, well, red wine isn't vegan, and wanting to wrestle that point to the ground. And so, like, if you were a vegan and somebody was getting all up huffy about that or whatever, just to be like, and if you're drinking a glass of red wine, just be like, yep, I'm a total hypocrite, and then just drink it and just like not even argue it. Or because it's exhausting and you don't have to try to win every single battle with people. um I had a lady one, this was like 20 years ago. I had a lady who was at a family function, and this was the guy I was dating at the time, had asked me, I was vegetarian, and she'd said, I think I was eating nuts or something, and she said something like, well, but like you're eating the meat of the nut. Like, that was just the craziest thing I've ever heard. That was top 5 strangest things I've ever heard. I didn't even know what to say to that. And I don't even remember what I did say to that, because I was like, well, it's the same word, but it means 2 different things. Like, I don't know. It's just strange. Anyways, anticipate this stuff as much as you possibly can. Or if somebody wants to argue with you about why you haven't had children yet, or why, you haven't like done certain things yet, then you don't have to argue your point. No, you can just say like, oh, I'm haven't gotten around to that yet, or I'm not, and then here's probably the biggest thing is to ideally with Thanksgiving, have it in a way where you can escape. So it's one thing if you're having Thanksgiving at your house and you've got, a handful of relatives coming over that you're like, oh God, every, time they make things so awful. And you can't escape because it's at your house. If you can go to a family member's house and then decide ahead of time, so with you and your significant other and your children, okay, guys, we're only going to stay here. We're leaving after pumpkin pie, so we're only going to be here for like an hour. And you get there late. Like, if people are like, okay, guys, we're eating at 3, you don't get there at 10 in the morning or noon, even if everybody else is, because they're going to watch a game or they're going to do whatever. Like, okay, guys, you guys are eating at 3. Okay, well, we've got a lot of stuff to do that day. We'll be there when we can. And then you get there when that works for you guys. So then you might get there at like, let's say 2:30, right? And oh boy, today, was really wild. We had a lot of things to do, even if having a lot of things to do meant you guys hanging out at your own house. And then you leave after pumpkin pie, maybe you help do dishes, what have you, and you're like, oh, we gotta go, we've got a really full day, we're gonna go whatever you're gonna go do, right? We really wanted to go shopping later on today, or you know we wanted to go volunteer or what have you. And so then that way you're leaving, so you're taking back your power. Instead of, they're saying Thanksgiving is going to go from 10 a.m. until 7 p.m. and everybody's going to be here. Instead of feeling like, well, I need to be there at 10 a.m. and then just get dragged through hell for the next, however many hours that is. Like, I don't need to do that. Like, I can show up and then leave when I want to. And, you know, they might not be okay with it, and anticipate that and just be like, yeah, 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 I know. I'm so sorry. We couldn't be here the whole time. We had other things we had going on. And if they're like, well, what other things did you have going on? It'd be like, well, we were, think we were going to try to volunteer today. We were going to, or we just wanted to chill out and have some family time today, or we're starting a new tradition in our family. I'm not a fan of lying. I think it's, you know, good to tell the truth, but to think about, okay, if, like we're going to start our own Thanksgiving tradition where we do whatever. We make gratitude rocks in the morning, and then we go around town and we hide them. That's going to be our new family thing. So we'll be over when we're done with that. Or you can just simply say, you know what, we just couldn't make it. Like we were wanting to sleep in and the kids had stuff going on and what have you, or, you know, but however you want to say it, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Daniel says, BYOC, bring your own car. Yes, wise words, Daniel. Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Or if you're going to ride with somebody else, get an agreement ahead of time of like, hey, I really, they're going from 10 to 7. I'm really down with like 3 to 5. So, or even having some sort of, if it's really a bad and an uncomfortable situation, having some sort of like safety word, or phrase or like gesture of this is my limit. So if you're at the table and if somebody says, if your word is apple pie, and that apple pie or maybe coffee cake, something that probably isn't going to be there. Somebody says, I could really go for a piece of coffee cake or some apple pie, or I could really stand to go for a walk. That's probably a good one. I could really stand to go for a walk. You can work that into a sentence. And then then the person that you're with, that's kind of the sign. And that's something that you guys both agree with. So if they say, I could really stand to go for a walk, you realize, okay, they're at their max too. This can be good if you're with, your spouse or significant other, so you're on the same page, or if you've got a sibling that you went there with and you guys are on the same page, that it's like, okay, whoever kind of taps out first, like they win, like then you guys are going to go. So oh, that's terrible. Sue says yes, the most hurtful thing is when they compare kids. Yeah, that's ridiculous. Vegan yogi, right? Says the comment people give me is that plants are alive too. I can't. I know. My mom says that one all the time. Carrots have feelings too. And there was some study she did where they screamed as they were plucked from the earth. And I was the same. I just was like, oh, okay. Yeah, but they don't have a central nervous system. Yeah. Yeah. Good times. Let's see. Okay, so Bonnie, you bring up a great point. Bonnie says Thanksgiving is going to be tough. It's at my house. I am dreading it, but I will try to have the attitude of gratitude in spite of the narcissists and flying monkeys. Yes. Okay, so you're in a situation, it's going to be difficult to get out of it. So then what can you do if you're kind of painted into a corner like this? So, do you have any people in your life, in your like real like person life, who sees what's going on and who sees the insanity and is in your corner? So that can be really helpful to try to kind of get support ahead of time and then get support when they leave to kind of vent. And so So that's something to think about. And then the other thing is to think about is to really try to go into it with that mindset of I am not going to let these people steal my joy. Like I'm gonna and it's so difficult to have that mindset for hours upon end when you've got that many difficult people in a room. Okay, you do have people, but they're not going to be there that day. So you can try to kind of just stay centered in it. You can almost, depending on how grounded you can stay, try to observe kind of like with this newfound information that you have. It's very interesting because now you're going to be a lot more emotionally detached from it. And so you can see this stuff as it's coming up. You can see how they're trying to kind of provoke a fight or kind of bait a person into a fight or um, just like the snarky little subtle put downs and all of these different dynamics at play. It's a lot easier when you can see this stuff coming and see it unfold between other people. So yeah, I would encourage you have just have that be your mantra. Like, I'm not going to let anybody steal my joy. You're there to have a good time, you're there to have some good food, you're there to be thankful for whatever you're thankful for, and nobody else gets that. Like, they don't get to steal your joy. So, um, yeah, and it might be kind of interesting. So, like, you could almost pretend that you are like a scientist observing the situation, or like a sociologist, maybe a sociologist observing everything as it's going down. That can be kind of a way to get some emotional distance and to take a more of like an observer role instead of an active participant role. So you're a sociologist watching this all go down. And you can kind of almost pretend like, I don't know, these are just people. Like, I don't know who they are. They're not family. We're not heavily emotionally invested in them. I don't have all of the back information on them. And now you're just observing them. Like, well, isn't this so interesting? And kind of what's going on here? And, it's sort of like I always get the biggest kick out of watching like these different animal shows when they have different scientists observe groups of animals, and they have they create this whole story and they give them names and everything. And they're like, well, here you can see out in the wild, we've called him Jimbo. He is the large male gorilla and his wife, Nikimbo. And they have this like, whole story about like the dynamics that go down. And here's the fight between, Jimbo and his brother, you know, I don't know, Sam Bimbo and like all of these things. And it's so interesting because they're oftentimes so right of like watching these different dynamics unfold. Like, here the gorilla is fighting for dominance. Sam Bimbo tried to steal the bamboo while he was sleeping, but so and so did this. And it's just it is like people are laughing at me. They're like, the wild kingdom. It is, because you're just taking this observer role and seeing like what is going on. Notice how like you know the head male gorilla took the largest piece of pumpkin pie. Well, while his youngest daughter, Katrina, didn't like that very much and began to cry. Out of guilt, the large male gorilla gave her a smaller piece of pie, showing that she has privilege within within the whatever they call a group of gorillas, the family of gorillas. And you know what I mean? Like, it's just then it's entertaining. Yeah, Phil likes that too. Or you could even envision them as like different types of animals. If you've got like that really obnoxious family member, like, and then the hyena snuck in, you know, like out of nowhere and began, you know, uh, just came for the turkey and the stuffing. And after the hyena got its fill and drank all of the whiskey, the hyena, quickly went downstairs and passed out in the basement or something like that. And so you can just kind of visualize people in different kind of animal roles. But that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to try to stay present and, like, as your different feelings surface with all of this stuff going on. It can be a really great exercise in getting in tune with how you feel, and then making a mental note of, like, okay, I'm going to try to remember like 3 or 4 of these different interactions fairly vividly so I can go write them down later on, because it really puts so many things into practice and just it kicks up so much stuff. Truth Seeker says yes, vultures too. Yes. Yes. Oh, that's a good one. Karen says, Dana, yes, pretend they are somebody else's family. Yes, that's a good one. Harmony Jello says, yes, hyenas, snakes, and donkeys. uh, my brother he's a personal trainer, and and he's a fitness model, and he's just like super shredded and always taking all these different pictures. And I always joke, we always joke he's a gym rat. And he had this picture he had on Instagram the other day. It was I found it to be hilarious, but it was him in this like pose in a tree. And so I had put on Instagram, like, now here is a gym rat in its natural habitat, but it won't stay long. Soon it will grow weak and will need to find other sources of protein, most likely protein shakes. And, and then we just started going back and forth, like on and on about him being in his, or actually not in his natural habitat, because his natural habitat's the gym. Well, Bonnie, keep us posted. She says, I'll definitely do this. It's very helpful. I think I might just survive Thanksgiving now. Yeah. I would encourage you to make that declaration ahead of time of how you want to feel during this day. That really is a big thing. And it can be so difficult when we're like, oh, I know what is coming. Like, to just know that it's just going to be something that you have to suffer through. But if you can anticipate this as much as possible, then then you can almost you can separate your feelings from the situation. You really, really can. And that takes some practice, but uh you know it can be done. You can get through it, and you can do more than just get through it. Like, you can actually get to the place where you enjoy it and it's entertaining to you. um you know and you have a good time, you have a good day. Not let them steal your joy or bring you down. Oh, it's so true. Maria says, I feel so stupid realizing this so late in life, but I'm naturally a one on one person, and narcissists are the worst that way. Now, with problem people, I will only hang out in a group, and what a difference. Absolutely. And that is such a huge aha moment. That's another thing that people can do with family, is if you do have that 1 or 2 people that are just absolutely, they're looking to push your buttons, to not let them kind of drag you away from the herd, right? So, like, don't let them like pull you aside in the kitchen, or like kind of trap you someplace so they can be ugly and hateful. And so it can help if you can kind of go in there with some other people that are understand your hesitation, But, if you're trying to avoid somebody, if you're going to go get, you're going to go get pie, it can really be helpful to wait until somebody else is in the kitchen to go get it. So they can't just try to, drag you off and be ugly. And that's a big deal. If you can't kind of go low contact or no contact with them. There was a gal, this was a while ago. Um, this was like, I don't know, when I first started doing these, and she was saying she was so dreading going to her son's wedding because her ex was going to be there and he was just really awful to her, and it was his whole family. And she's like, I really want to go. It's my son's wedding, but I don't know how to do this. And so we had talked about it, and she'd identified, okay, what are the things that he's normally really ugly about? And I think it was like her weight and her appearance. And so I encouraged her, I'm like, okay, let's think of some things that you can say back to him. So, and to keep the situation light. So if he makes a comment about, oh, I've seen you've gained weight, then you can just say something like, oh, and I can see you are just as charming as ever. Right. And then you just kind of smile, then you turn around and walk off. Or to not let it ruffle you, and to just decide ahead of time that you're just not going to let it ruffle you. But again, it helps if you can anticipate the stuff and have a comeback or some sort of plan to where you're not knocked off balance, that you either just start crying or you don't even know what to say. So I had encouraged her, I'm like, bring a friend, and you guys, your whole goal is to go there, and I want you to dance and have such a great time that your feet hurt and your knees hurt and you're laughing until you're crying. And anticipate that his family, if they've got that history of kind of trying to drag you off and be ugly to you or ask questions that aren't their business or what have you, you tell your son ahead of time, like, I really, this is the friend that I'm bringing, this is kind of, we don't want to sit near them. I think it's just going to be, this is your special day, we want to make it about you. So, and if they put you at this table or what have you, to be there as little as possible, and to not go to the bathroom alone, like bring, so like you're not alone for them to be ugly. And then to get out there and have a really great time, and nothing is going to upset them more to see that you are actually enjoying your life. And she did. She went to the wedding. She had a fantastic time. She was so thrilled she went. And, um, so much of this is anticipating this stuff ahead of time and then planning for it. So. Vegan Yogi says, Dana, why does it take us so much pain to see narcissists for who they are? Red flags all over the place with my ex. I was blinded by family members too. Oh, I really think people are really just not taught that there are different types of people out there. And if we are taught that, we think that we can spot them. One of the points in this book, this boundaries book that we're reading for book club, that I really liked, is she talks about, nobody is a good judge of character. And we all think that we are. And I thought that was so profound, in especially in a positive way. We all think that we can spot a problematic person, and the vast majority of time we can't. So to realize this, like, it takes time. It takes time for this stuff to surface, to really see a person for who they are. Everybody's on their best behavior for the first month or so. And it's easy to, and again, like, this is all, so much of this is like media. And I mean, oh my God, even like Dr. Phil, I can't stand Dr. Phil, but a lot of his shows, he'll excuse like outrageous, unexcusable behavior. And I see this time and time again, where it truly is treated like it's a relationship issue. And it's treated like, well, nobody's perfect, and, compassion and forgiveness and all of these concepts are so twisted that it keeps a person stuck. And unless you've ever really lived it, y- a person doesn't understand like how just soul erasing and destroying these kinds of dynamics can be. So, even people that are supposedly like trained in this stuff oftentimes don't have a really solid understanding of it, and they think that they do, which is even more damaging because then people are just kind of, out there thinking like, and it's no wonder, right? Like no wonder targets of narcissists tend to think like, I must be somehow, equally to blame for this. I need to try harder to get through to them, to get them to understand what they're doing is hurtful. Um, you know, like that's the messages that we're getting from religion and from the media, and then of course, movies and stuff. It's this idea of love is supposed to be this like, obsessive, over the top love bombing, fast moving whirlwind romance. People are hopping in the sack right away, and they're, you know moving across the country and all of this nonsense, and it's just garbage. It's just garbage. And we've been fed garbage for so long that we don't even know what healthy is. So, it's no wonder. That's why people don't see this stuff clearly, because we're just not taught about it. And we're not taught to understand our emotions or our instincts. And so of course people are going to get tangled up in this. It's why people get tangled up with online dating scams right and left. And here's the thing, hindsight is always 2020. And the reason it's 2020 is because that emotional event has passed and we're not so emotionally invested in it. When a person's emotionally invested in something, they're because remember what we were talking about before, a person's beliefs always have to match their behaviors. And when a person is emotionally invested in something, they will continue to double down on it because it's really difficult for us to admit when we're wrong. And that goes for any human being. It's really difficult for us to admit we've made a mistake. And so it's hard for us to see that it's a problem when we're not taught that this is what a problem like looks like and feels like and actually is. And it's even more difficult, and the more invested a person is, then you kind of add in, not only are they emotionally invested, but now they're financially invested and they're physically invested, and they've got children and they have a house and they have shared accounts, and it's really difficult to get away from a problematic person when the lives are so intertwined. Just like it's the same reason so difficult for a person to get away from a cult when they might have some really outrageous beliefs, right? Like that the mothership is going to come down and take them to, planet Xenon, and um, I don't even know, like just anything that's really far out there. But if it's really difficult for them to leave, the more invested they are in that. If they've given up all of their earthly possessions, and they're no longer talking to their children, and they've sold their house, and they've quit their job, and they've shaved their head, and they're doing all these things. They're so invested in this. Almost to admit that they were wrong and that they got tangled up in a cult, it can create such psychological collapse in a person that it can really drive them to suicide when that light does go on and they realize, oh my God, what have I done? It's really, really difficult, and that's one of the biggest challenges with a person getting out of an abusive relationship or a cult or a dating scam, is there's such a tremendous amount of shame that goes along with this when they realize what they got tangled up in. And it's, how did I not see this? What's so wrong with me? I can't believe I did this. And then, of course, everybody else is oftentimes saying that exact same thing too. So, and interestingly enough, in that same, when one of the South Park episodes, uh, Heidi, Cartman's girlfriend, does decide to leave him. And she's like, yeah, he's a jerk. I'm out. I'm done. And all of her friends were sitting around the lunch table and they're like, yeah, we were waiting for you to come to your senses. I mean, come on, he was such garbage. And really giving her a hard time about just laughing and joking and, you know, how people do when everybody else sees it and then that one person doesn't. And then what ended up happening in that South Park episode is then Heidi ends up feeling so bad about herself that she actually ends up going back to Cartman because she's feeling so bad that it's sort of like, you know, it's just weird. It's like then she kind of like that only kind of going back makes her feel less bad because then she'd have to admit that maybe it's not, or not admit, but come to believe that things weren't that bad. It's just, it's a twisted thing that our brains do. So, um, and so many of us gloss over red flags because we don't, I think people in general, and gloss over red flags until they hit that red flag that they can no longer deny. Generally, it's maybe their children are being molested, they get hit, they become really aggressive, or they hit their animal, they find them cheating. There's some sort of really concrete big event where they're like, you know what, that's my line in the sand. And then they start taking a different course of action. But it's a lot. It's a lot for a person to really wrap their minds around. And then again, and then other people, like, even if you do see a red flag, like, it's really common for other people to be like, well, if you were to see a red flag and you're like, well, I made a comment, he was on his we went out to dinner the other night and he had 4 drinks, and in a space of like an hour, and I made a comment like, oh, did you have a rough day? And he began yelling at me and saying that, I'm not his mother, and what have you, and this, that, and the other. And then other people might chime in and just say, well, yeah, you shouldn't have been nagging him like that. Or, well, you think everybody's an alcoholic because your ex is an alcoholic. And then they kind of talk you out of any concerns that you might have about the situation. And the reality, and then of course, and then too, what happens is then people get caught up in like, so let's just take that situation a little bit further. So let's say a person does have 4 drinks in a space of an evening, we'll even say, and they're like, well, I don't know, that kind of seems like a lot to me. And like, I mean, my ex was an alcoholic and they really drank a lot more than that. And so, I mean, I guess maybe I'm kind of weird about people drinking. I'm not really comfortable about that. And then they start thinking, okay, well, when is it really a problem? Because then friends are like, well, hey, I normally drink 4 or 5 or 6 drinks in a night and I'm fine. But then they're like, well, but maybe it's fine for you, but not fine for him. The reality is, and this is what Maria and some others were talking about earlier, it's not about other people, it's about you. If 4 drinks is more than you're comfortable with, then it's a problem. If 1 drink is more than you're comfortable with, then it's a problem. We don't have to figure out where is the line in the sand, what is their relationship with alcohol, how many drinks is too many drinks, we're not looking at how many drinks in an hour can the body process. Like, you're not trying to analyze them. You're getting more in tune with like what's workable or not workable for you. And then getting to that place where you are so grounded in what's workable or not workable for you that it does not matter if you're in a whole room full of other people that are friends and family and therapists and what have you that disagree with you, because this does not work for me. It's totally okay to be like, you know what, I don't want to be with somebody that drinks on a regular basis. Totally fine. It's okay to be with somebody that doesn't drink, period. Like, that's totally fine. And it's okay to be with, I want somebody that drinks a few drinks every night. Like, that's fine too. Like, it's figuring out what works for you. So difficult to navigate all of this stuff. Yes. And that's so true, Maria. Maria says we gloss over the red flags because we want the lie over the truth. We want the fairy tale love over the truth. We want the dreams we've cultivated. Yes. It's the seduction story. What book was that in? You read for the, was it the betrayal bonds? Might have been the betrayal bonds book about we have to give up the seduction story of this lure of whatever they're trying to hook us with, and what we're trying to hook ourselves with, right? It's really and the thing is, like, if you can understand too, like how our brains work with all of this, and they might be manipulating us, but our brains are also manipulating us too. Like, cognitive dissonance is a very real thing, and it's an absolute game changer if you can really fully understand that concept. And it's difficult for us to be aware of when we're truly experiencing it ourselves, but it's, and when we're experiencing denial, like generally the first sign of denial is confusion. So it starts because it's cognitive dissonance. It's when we're having two conflicting thoughts about the same thing at the same time. And, you know, it's the thought of like, I really like this guy, and oh yeah, wow, like he just yelled at me, and now I'm not really sure if I don't know, I don't want to be with somebody who yells at me, but I also really want to be with this guy. And so it's these two conflicting thoughts about the same thing at the same time. And because our beliefs have to match our behaviors, we're going to oftentimes pick the thought, pick the belief that's going to match that behavior. So if the behavior is going to be, I'm going to stay with this person, we have, in order for us to be in alignment, we have to pick the thought that's going to go along with that. So if our action is going to be, I'm going to stay with this guy, then the thought is going to have to be some sort of justification of we're going to have to believe that we're going to deny it completely. That didn't happen, right? Or it wasn't that bad, or I've been through worse. This is somehow workable. Or maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing, or some sort of justification. He had a bad day. I criticized his driving, that kind of thing. We're gonna have to justify it. And then that smooths out that cognitive dissonance. So now our thoughts equal our actions, and we're okay. But do you see how this can get to a slippery slope? Because now that's, boom, become our new normal. So now when he yells, we're now more okay with that because it's already happened once. So we've already justified it once. Now it's going to be a slippery slope. We're going to continue, most likely continue justifying stuff until the next major problem happens. And because abuse tends to be this slow, insidious kind of fog almost that sets in, and that's why it's a fog. It's this fog of manipulation, and it's this fog of our own cognitive dissonance that's happening, that's getting us lost in things, and we can't see our way out. It's really, really tricky. And it's why we fight other people too. When somebody points out something wrong with our relationship, and you kind of guard it like somebody put a picture on Facebook the other day of an angry possum guarding a sack of trash, and they said, like, this is what you guys look like that are defending, this is what women look like when they're defending guys that are, cheating and losing and abusing, using and abusing, and doing all these things. Like, you look like an angry possum guarding a sack of trash. Like, come on, wake up. Like, but that's what it is. People get really defensive because it's sort of like when you're a kid at school, and if a kid's complaining about their parent, and if somebody else chimes in and they're like, yeah, your mom does suck, then they get really upset. They're like, hey, what are you talking about my mom for? It's like, I can talk about her all day long, but if you talk about her, we're going to fight. And it's the same with the adult version of that. Like, my relationship might be awful and I might talk crap about it, but I'm the only one that can do that. And if you start talking crap, then I'm either going to distance myself from you, or I'm probably going to quit talking about stuff to you because you keep pointing it out to me and I don't want to hear it. So very interesting to see. Interesting. Yeah, 70s reader says, why do narcs often declare themselves as empaths? I think it's more, honestly, I think it's more of the sociopathic ones that do. And, I guess when I think of a kind of a stereotypical narcissist, they are oftentimes not emotionally aware, and they don't think that they don't realize that, like, they're lost in a paper bag of themselves. Like I don't think Donald Trump would ever think of himself as an empath. Um, I don't even think that he would think like to think that. Like it's just I think he's very much like unapologetically himself. Like that's kind of more of like that stereotype of like I am who I am, take it or leave it. They don't care. Versus more of like the exploitative ones that tend to come across like that. I think that's more of that wolf in sheep's clothing. If they truly believe that about themselves, it might be because they realize that they are really good at being in tune with other people's emotions, but it's so that they can manipulate them to get their own like needs met. So that's the difference. Whereas like a normal empath is very in tune with other people's emotion, like the emotional energy in a room and the emotions of other people. And frankly, I think most empaths have grown up with some sort of like abuse or neglect or both in their home, or they grew up very fast, they had to become adults very quickly for whatever reason. They had a parent that was depressed, they had a parent that was personality disordered or mentally ill and unstable, um, or a parent that was never home, so they had to just grow up really quickly. Um, but so real quick too, I think there is a difference. I think there's a difference between empaths and codependents. And I think many people that are codependent struggle with codependency are often empaths, but not all empaths are um, codependent. So, and the big difference there is having boundaries. So it's a very powerful skill set, like having a huge amount of empathy and having that compassion and that caring and kind of being able to read a room and read other people and have a sense of what's going on. It sucks, but if you can learn to draw boundaries with that, then it can really rein that in. So your energy is not so diffused and you're not so consistently taken advantage of. But I'd say a lot of people that have been through an abusive relationship and they come across the term empath and they're like, that's me to a T, but they're scared because they don't know how to kind of balance that and keep themselves safe without radically changing that part of themselves. And like, they're like, I am an empath. I kind of like being an empath. um, or they're like, I don't like being an empath, I want to change this, but I don't know how. And then they don't just build up boundaries, they build up like fortresses, and then they just want to keep everybody away. So it's a really positive skill set, but it helps to understand it and understand boundaries and getting more of a kind of a sense of self with all of that. That 70s reader says, so are they disillusioned into thinking that they are empaths while having no idea what that means? Mm, I think it depends on how you define empath. I think that they can be incredibly empathic, um, in terms of, I mean, there's a lot of it's like what they're doing with it is the problem, right? So I mean, there's a lot of sociopaths out there that are, yes, I would say that they're incredibly empathic. They can very much relate to other people's pain and emotions, and they can read a room and they can read other people. except they kind of use those abilities for bad instead of good. Whereas more of what we would consider to be an empath are people that tend to be more in like caring professions or caring people in general, and they see another person's pain, and then their response is to want to help them. Whereas more of like the sociopathic kind, they see another person's pain and then they try to exploit that. But they might do that in like a very caring way at first. There's a lot of like spiritual gurus and um religious leaders and all kinds of people, like caregivers of all kinds, that can come across as wolf in sheep's clothing. And because they're really good at like building rapport and being in tune with another person's emotions, but it's the it's to exploit it. But yeah, to listen to them talk, they feel like they're really in tune with other people, and but it's not to they understand all these emotions, but it's to a like problematic end. Yes, I agree. Vegan Yogi says, yeah, my ex told me all the time how he loved, how innocent and compassionate I was. Run. Yeah. I think there's a lot of, in the vegan community, there's a lot of, there's a lot of problematic people everywhere. That's what it boils down to. And the only way to really tell is to kind of just, paying attention to how you feel. And if somebody comes across as problematic to you or not, and realizing it doesn't matter, like we don't have to diagnose it or wait for concrete proof. Like if it's a problem for you, it's a problem for you. And but to be aware, yeah, I think any support groups, vegan community, vegetarian community, spiritual communities, religion in general is full of like exploitative people, probably more so than regular communities, because people have their guard down and they know that. They can tell you, they know, they're in tune enough to know, they're such highly skilled manipulators that they know everything another person needs to know in order to get what they want. So they can say all the right things, but there's no sincerity, there's no depth there. Yes, I agree completely. Jane says it's very important to be careful with whom you're vulnerable and open around, because you can easily become a target. Absolutely. And that goes back to, none of us are good at reading people. Uh, let me rephrase that. It's harder to get a false, how would I say this? It's harder to, like, a problematic person often comes across as problematic. Like most of us can kind of tell that kind of a person. It's much more difficult to come across a charismatic, likable, you know, um, person, to realize that they might be problematic. So just because a person comes across like a sheep doesn't mean that they're not actually a wolf. And the only way to tell is just to give it enough time and to see like what's going on there. Phil says, how do we stop being so open? How do you know when you're being too open? I keep getting into that over and over again, and then what I say gets manipulated. It's, I think it takes practice. How do you know when you're being so open? Is, I guess, to see, opening up should be kind of like a slow bloom opening. And I think what a lot of us tend to do is we tend to get really deep really fast, and we let other people take the lead with the conversation. And so it's normal human behavior for us to try to match the kind of mirroring is in a healthy sense, is a very normal part of how human beings like interact and relate and bond to each other. So it's very common for one person to offer up some sort of story and for us to try to match it. So if somebody's on your first date telling you about, their mother died when they were 8 and how intense that was, you know, and it's very common for a person to just say like, "Oh my goodness, I'm so incredibly sorry." And then as a way to try to um, kind of just make them feel more comfortable, we might offer up something, incredibly traumatic that happened when we were a child, or something along the same lines of, well, I was never very close to my own mother, and um, I can only imagine how hard that must have been for you. And so with a predator, so even let's just use that situation. Let's say they're not a predator. Let's just say somebody else, or maybe here's something more common. You're on your first date with somebody, and like their first date, they start talking about their awful divorce, right? And they're not a predator. Like they're just a normal person who's obviously not ready to date. Like they're talking about their divorce on their first date, and they're angry and they're bitter and they're just kind of going off on this tangent. We might feel obligated to then start talking about our last breakup or our divorce, and to realize, okay, this is way too much information too soon. It's hard to catch yourself at the time, but realizing that you don't have to answer every single question that's asked of you. And that, I think it really kind of goes back to valuing yourself and valuing your emotions and valuing your time and valuing who is in your inner circle, and realizing that this might sound maybe kind of silly, but really it's going to be it should be a privilege for a person to get to know you. Okay, that it's not that we're not just so blindly giving of ourselves and our emotions and our time, and if anybody that needs anything at any time, day or night, they can call on you. Like that's not having boundaries. If anybody has any question, if they want to talk about anything, that you're just an open book, that's not having boundaries. And so for many of us, myself included, you know if we like deep conversations and um, kind of being more emotionally real with people, it can take some practice to kind of reel that in and realize, I need to slow things down a little bit and really see if I really click with this person, because not only is it too much, it's I'm telling them too much about me, but I also don't want to continue this where they're telling me so much about them, because what if we decide after the second, what if I decide, not, either one of us, what if either one of us decides after like the second or third or fourth date that we're not a good fit? Now, odds are somebody's going to have hurt feelings and somebody is going to feel vulnerable and ashamed. And so I don't want that to happen to me, and I don't want that to happen to them either. So, kind of knowing that, to kind of slow things down. And so if they open up a little bit, it's about you controlling the pace kind of based on your boundaries, which, I think the more you learn about the stuff, the healthier they'll get, the more in alignment they'll get. But then you can start kind of slowing things down. You can switch the topic. You can kind of empathize. Boy, that must have been really hard. It sounds like that marriage really needed to end. I'm really glad that you're okay with that. And then kind of just transition into something else. So you can tell how your boundaries, if you're opening up too soon, probably the best way to tell is if at the end of the night or whatever the situation is, if you feel like you've overshared, if you're like, man, I can't believe I said all that stuff. Or you almost, maybe to an extreme, like you feel embarrassed, or you feel almost like sick to your stomach, or um, thinking to yourself, well, I hope I didn't blow it. I hope they're going to call me back. I hope I didn't scare them off. Those are kind of all signs that it was too much too soon. So, and it takes practice. I think one of the biggest things to help with this is, because it's very difficult. Human beings, kind of by nature, we're social creatures. We want to connect with other people. We want to bond and talk and do all this stuff. If a person, this is very oftentimes the case with a person that's single. I would say even more so with a guy. Well, different. Men and women are different, but with a guy who's a very social guy, and if he's a single parent, because men oftentimes don't get together and talk about deep stuff, right? So if a guy is really feeling kind of like, I have nobody to talk to about this, but then if they're, going on dates with their female friends, and then they're just really letting loose, then the unintended consequences, especially with dates, it could really scare a lot of dates off, or it could attract all the wrong women and a lot of like predatorial women. So, it's difficult when a person doesn't have um, a lot of like other adult conversation with other people. So that's why it's so encourage people to have, meetup.com, making sure that you have hobbies, that you have activities, that you have a life, that you have more than just this person that you're in the relationship with to talk to. Because it is important. It's because it's really difficult to hold healthy boundaries if you've only got one other person in your life and you're kind of putting all your eggs in that basket, whether you realize it or not. Yes, and I agree. New Chris says, Pete Walker talks about this. If you've always been neglected, it's common to be narcissistic and dominate conversations in the beginning of friendships and therapy. Absolutely. And yeah, if a person's lonely, that too, it's just they're so starved out that they're just going to talk and talk and talk. Yes, that's a great point. Jane says just because a person is nice does not mean that they are good. Just because a person is a good listener does not mean they have your best interest at heart. Yes, very true. It's just there's no way around it. It's just going slow. I see all these other videos on YouTube that are like, the psychopathic stare, and there's all, tips and tricks to tell if a person is, a predator or what have you. And that stuff is interesting, but the biggest thing is time. It just because they come across in different ways. Charles Manson, Bill Cosby, Scott Peterson, you know, like there's some examples of all of the different ways that like manipulative people, like predatorial people, can come across. And so there is no one size fits all. Like the only thing that you can do is pay attention to how you feel and have boundaries, and it's okay to have deal breakers. It's okay to leave a situation that doesn't work for you. Oh, yikes. Little Miss says, I had a narcissist ex that brought up on a first date that one out of every four women have been sexually assaulted. Like he wanted me to confess to him. That's disturbing. Yeah. So that's a great example of a seemingly uh like just conversation topic that might not register for a lot of people as that's inappropriate. Like that's a little too much too soon, right? And even though he's talking about it generally, if it's kind of hinting at like let's talk about more about you, you don't. And I think that's a big thing for a lot of people is to realize like you don't have to answer every question, and you don't have to like let somebody else control the pace of things like that. And so somebody was talking the other day in one of the groups about sexual partners, and they're like, did somebody else's ex want to know all about like how many people they'd been with and how they were in bed and how they compared and on and on and on. And I thought, this is a very common theme. That's a kind of a common theme with like insecure people too, because the reality is it doesn't matter like how things were with your ex is how things, there's no benefit to even having that conversation, because it's, it's going to wind up with somebody, if you're swapping stories, right, about your partners and what they did right and what they didn't do right and this, that, and the other, and how many people, somebody's going to leave that conversation feeling insecure and probably jealous and probably hurt. So or inadequate. And like, so there's just no, but like, why? Like, there's no benefit to that. So it's very common for people to ask, how many people have you been with, or, blah, blah, but that is nobody's information except for yours. And so if you decide to say, I'd really rather not discuss that, I feel like that's a no-win conversation, you can say that, whereas maybe like, I know for me, like the old me would have felt the need, would have felt like, well, my life's an open book. I'll just go ahead and tell you the total truth about me. Whereas the new me realizes, even though I have no problem being totally honest about things, people don't need to know every little thing about me, especially people, like my YouTube life is different than my personal life, right? Like my off YouTube life, but off YouTube life, people, they for sure don't need to know everything. Um, okay. Well, good deal, Phil. He says, I'm going to bed. I got court in the morning. So good night. And he says, if it wasn't for this group and for you, I would not be able to climb this mountain that I am climbing, and I would not be the man I am today. So thank you. Well, I'm humbled and honored that you even feel that way. So we're all a work in progress, and glad that we can support you on your journey. Vegan Yogi says Brene Brown talks about the power of vulnerability and encourages being an open book. Thoughts about this? I think vulnerability, I don't know. It's a weird place that we're at right now with the internet, because I don't know. It's weird. I struggle with this. Like I was saying, like my online life and my offline life are two very different things. I kind of think on one level, being an open book and having things be fully transparent, like there's a big part of me that's like, it's how we all learn. And so like when I share stuff about my own life, it's more of from like a learning perspective. So I can show like this was my mindset and this is what's going on. And so other people, it can kind of like more normalize what other people might be going through. So I guess there's a purpose behind me being open about stuff like that. And I know for me, like the people that I watch on YouTube, um, I really enjoy how open they are. Like I love like weight loss journey shows, and people are like in their thong, you know, on YouTube, and they're taking their measurements and they're weighing themselves. Oh, you could not pay me enough to, nobody needs to see that. But good for them. Like I love seeing them being that real and just really like literally putting it all out there and talking about their journey. To me, that's fascinating. So it's like that human interest level, but I think it's different. I think the hesitation is, when you really open yourself up like that, you're chumming the waters for predators, and for people to really be aware of that. And especially, it's one thing on YouTube, like people that have like those weight loss shows and stuff, or channels and stuff, depending on how big their channel is, I doubt they're that open with people that they like first meet, right? Or that they've known for a few months. It's always kind of an awkward conversation to have of, oh, I had this YouTube channel and this is like, this is what it's all about. So they're probably very different in their personal life and with the amount of stuff that they're open with. And yeah, it's weird. It's weird because the internet's taken over. I mean, when I started doing all this, I really thought that I'd be able to keep my two worlds separate. And that did not happen. There's just, the internet's hard to keep stuff separate. And so that caused me a tremendous amount of anxiety because I was not emotionally prepared to have these two worlds. I mean, it's the unintended consequences has been huge. And so now it's very difficult. and my channel is still very small, comparatively. So it's not like people, know who I am on the street or anything, but, um, talking to like new people that I like, obviously all my friends know what I do. So it's just always kind of awkward when it comes up of like, oh, well, now, like, what do so it's almost like this forced, weird boundaries that I have with people. And I just try to change, try to tell them like kind of the bare minimum and then kind of let that go and then shift the conversation back to them because I don't really want to field a ton of personal questions. It's just weird. I don't know. But I guess to answer your question, for the most part, vulnerability is great with safe people. It's when a person becomes vulnerable to around strangers it's a bad idea, you know? So that's what I'm saying. Like healthy boundaries, this stuff's not taught and it really needs to be. Okay, guys, what time? Am I over? Probably over. I don't even know I don't even know. There used to be a timer on here, and now there's not a timer. I don't know why. Chaos every single week. Don't know why. Ardell saying, I'm trying to just gray rock, but I don't see an end in sight. It's causing depression. And I've since started a YouTube channel as an outlet. Yeah. Well, and that can be really a good thing. I was thinking about the stuff today. It's interesting that you kind of brought that up about people starting YouTube channels and whatnot. And um, I think that's one of those things too, like with if you're talking about it's difficult anyhow. It doesn't matter what you start a YouTube channel on. It can be a cooking channel. It can be about like building stuff with Legos. It can be about, narcissistic abuse. It doesn't matter. It's very difficult to get the trolls and the haters, or even people that really do like what you do and they give you a thumbs down or they unsubscribe. The first time that happens, it can just really feel like a knife in the heart. It just is so painful. But then it's hard to not take stuff really personally, and especially if somebody's, makes some hateful comments. So there's a degree of like, I would encourage you to kind of prepare yourself emotionally for that kind of stuff. And it happens. It happens to everybody, and it hurts. But it's just part of it. It's for sure, part of being on YouTube, and to not take it personally. Just kind of FYI, because it can really knock the wind out of somebody's sails. Okay, good deal, guys. Let's just take a few moments. We'll just get grounded and then we'll call it a night. And then I will see you guys next week. So, one last time, real quick, the book we are book club, is Boundaries After a Pathological Relationship by Adeline Birch. It's under $4 on US dollars on Kindle if you're an ebook person. It's a great read. It's a couple days, and my notes are going to be up on it hopefully tomorrow on my website, thriveafterabuse.com. You can go to the book club section, and that's where they will be. So yes, that's it. And if you're interested in reading my book that came out about a month ago, it's called Start Here. And it's my name, Dana Morningstar. It's on Amazon. Paperback is not out yet, but ebook is if you're interested. So, okay, guys. Okay, so let's just get grounded and get some good energy flowing, and we'll call it a night. Oh, that feels so good. Okay. So if you want to close your eyes and get comfortable, or you can leave your eyes open, whatever is more comfortable to you. Let's we'll do 5 deep breaths in and out. And with each breath, let's breathe in through your nose and exhale out through your mouth. And with each breath in, feeling that breath going deeper and deeper. And feeling the tension as it just starts to leave your body, melting away, releasing that tension from your face, from your jaw, from your forehead. Moving on down, relaxing your jaw and your mouth, letting your tongue fall from the roof of your mouth. Maybe even letting your mouth just kind of fall open a little bit. Feel how it feels when it's relaxed. Relaxing your neck, your shoulders. And if you're sitting, you can kind of roll your shoulders back, opening up your chest. And if you're laying down, you can do the same. Just let your shoulders just kind of fall open, letting your arms and your hands fall down by your side. Relaxing your stomach and your hips, and letting your legs fall to a position that's comfortable for you. Letting your knees and your feet kind of fall to a position that's comfortable. Remembering to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Being here in this moment, being fully present in this moment, leaving all of your worries and your stress and your tension at the door, and realizing that when we're done here, that you can go back and you can pick all of those worries and tension and stress up if you so choose. Or you can decide to just leave it there altogether. And just being in this present moment, turning your attention inward. See if you can hear or feel your heartbeat as you shift your attention into your body. And with every beat of your heart, See if you can feel the blood pumping and the energy as it tingles in your hands and in your fingers and in your feet. Remembering to breathe in through your nose and exhaling through your mouth. Bringing your attention back up to your face and remembering to relax. If there's any tension that you're holding in your jaw, in your forehead, or in your eyes, just releasing that. Paying attention to your body, bringing your awareness if there's any areas that are stiff or feel pinched, that seem uncomfortable in any way. And as you breathe in, bringing that breath to those areas. And with each exhale, exhaling that pain or the tension, the stiffness, that pinched feeling. Exhaling all of that through that breath and letting it go. Now envision a beautiful white, maybe even silverish kind of light. See that light inside your chest. And it might start off as a small flame, like on a candle. And visualize it growing bigger inside of you. And it expands just effortlessly as it goes and grows and fills up your torso, and your neck, your arms, and your legs. And imagine that light swirling around every single cell in your body. Beautiful, healing, joyful, blissful, wonderful light. Feel it as it moves effortlessly and joyfully through your body and around all of your cells, sending that light and that love and that healing energy to every single cell in your body. And that light, it's here to help. And you can call on it at any time. Now that you can feel all of that light and love in you and surrounding you, visualize some people that maybe you've come across today or this week, or maybe that you've heard about on the news or in other people's conversations, that you would like to go out and just give a big energetic hug to them and send some of this light and love their way. And let's take a few minutes now and go out to those people and give them a hug, or other people, or maybe even animals in your life, letting them know how much you appreciate them. And realizing that even though we might have stress and concerns and worry, that there truly is so much that we can be thankful and grateful for. And that we can still be thankful and grateful, even if we're in tremendous amounts of emotional or physical pain. And that doesn't lessen what we're going through any. It doesn't mean that we're okay with what's going on or what happened. It means that we're making the decision to stay thankful and grateful for everything that we are thankful and grateful for in our life. For the people, the places, the situations, the big things and the little things. There's a lot of things about life that are not right and that are not fair. But life, there's still so many things about life that are still really good. And so when you're ready, come on back and give yourself a really big hug and realize that you matter, and that your thoughts and your feelings and your hopes and your desires and your dreams matter, and that you're doing a good job, and that you can and will get through this. Okay, when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes. So thank you guys so much for joining me tonight and for everything. And you guys have a fantastic day tomorrow, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday. So Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So take care and have a fantastic night. Lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and I'll see you next week. Okay, bye.